oral buyer agency never gets you paid, right? Has to be turned into written buyer agency in order to present that offer, to even write the offer and then present it and then get to a closing, hopefully. Must be in writing. Things need to be in writing. We have a variety of agency relationships. Here we go. A firm could, although most don't, they'd be foolish to do so, but they could only represent sellers. I only deal with sellers, not interested in buyers. They could also only work with buyers. They could also work with buyers and sellers, but never do dual agency. And we do see that a reasonable amount. I ask every CE class out of curiosity, whether because you don't want to or your firm won't let you, do you not do dual agency? Do you choose not to do it? And many of them always say, yeah, won't do it. I don't even want to go there. And it's probably because they had a bad situation. Because remember, you can't give either party an advantage over the other one. And you can imagine if you've ever even had a real estate transaction or heard of one or watched it on HGTV, that it gets contentious and people start throwing fingers around, pointing and laying blame. And the spouses are not going to, they might argue with each other at some point, but ultimately you're going to be the bad guy. You're going to be the scapegoat when they make up with each other, even though you were kind of just watching. You're the easy target as the broker. So be careful what you say. Don't ever side with one either. They're going to try to pull you in there too. Well, Neil thinks I'm right. No, Neil didn't say either way. Neil's just telling you what your options are. What you choose to do is between you two. And you let me know what that is. That's if it's like spouses. In a dual agency situation, it's all the worse, because now you got people that don't have to love each other. We've got a buyer and a seller that you're supposed to be representing both. And that seller says, well, I hired you first. I knew you first. Don't you owe me at least a little bit more than them? Can't you just give me some idea of what that buyer's thinking? We've been counter offering back and forth 10 times now. What is it going to take for this buyer to finally agree? How close are we? We're $3,000 apart on the price. Are they a little bit close? Do I need to come down just a little bit, or am I going to have to come down a lot? Sorry, I'm a dual agent. I can't give you negotiating advice as a dual agent. And if this is the first time they're hearing about this, that's going to be a problem for you. So make sure you explain the limitations of dual agency early and what that really means. Like that example that I just shared, level of understanding. They need to get it, because in the moment it's too late. Now you've just caused a problem and they're going to be mad at you, right? And that buyer's going to do the same thing. Oh, I made a fair offer, 20,000 below asking. Isn't that funny how they think something's fair? Because my uncle, who lives in California and sold 3 houses in 1967, said that you should lowball 20% less than what's asked. Oh, well, okay. What's your uncle think we should do now? Don't ask. So they, by the way, they always take the free advice and value it more than your paid advice. And it's usually all kinds of crazy, coming from all kinds of unjustified places. Like the first time seller who was upset after helped her sell the one I helped her buy a few years earlier. And then she was buying the upgrade house. And it was just at the start of this new crazy market, like 5-6 years ago. And they were asking $195, and we had to compete with some other offers, and we had to go all the way up to $196 to beat all those other offers. And at the time, it's like, over asking. Fast forward a few years, and we'd have probably had to go to $296, maybe not, but close. Well, Dad wasn't happy that we were paying over asking price, and he pulled up all kinds of stats and said, "What about these? These show that you should be paying less." And I said, "Well, okay." She was near tears on the phone with me and said, "Dad doesn't. What am I?" Okay, it's okay. Send me what the comps are that he's looking at. They were a year old, 2 years old. They were from the Z word, Zillow. pulls things from tax records, all kinds of reasons that these aren't valid, right? And had to talk her off the ledge, but she, okay, I get it. And Dad eventually, and then the very next week, another one just like it down the street sold for $205. That helped Dad feel better. But you got to work with Dad sometimes, even if he's not the client, because he's a barometer of the client, and you've got to keep kind of things happy and don't have attitudes with people that are in the way. Here's another big one. Transactional brokerage is not practice. We don't do that here. Transactional means nobody's representing anybody. There's got to be somebody you're representing in North Carolina. Everybody's got somebody, or who, if a broker's involved, they're representing someone, I should say. Transactional is just, hey, let's just do the transaction. I don't owe anybody anything. And then there's this guy. Good old dual agency. These examples, these questions are the ones that kind of give a chill in your belly, but it's okay. Just take your time, read through the question the first time. Just kind of observe it like you're on vacation. Just kind of scan it. Okay, I'm seeing words. And then what are they asking? What's that last sentence say? What is it that they are trying to get to the point of? And then read through the answer choices and then go back and say, okay, now that I've seen the landscape of this question scenario, I know what they're asking. I know what the answer choices are. Now let me actually think about it. Then read it and identify who's representing who and look for little buzzwords. If they say things like co-brokerage, odds are that's not dual agency, and the answer choice should reflect that this is not a dual agency situation, because in co-brokerage, that's two different firms. And dual agency is impossible when it's two different firms, right? Step by step, just like willful and negligent misrepresentation and omission. Just take it step at a time. Because in dual agency, that firm is the only firm. And it is the dual agent. By the way, in that type of dual agency, not designated, but I call it true dual agency, everybody in that firm is a dual agent. If the firm is a true dual agent, all of the brokers in there are true dual agents. None of them can tell the buyer the lowest the seller might take, or the seller the most the buyer might be willing to pay. Now, that doesn't mean that all of them know all the secrets of the seller, right? Because it starts with the seller. So any of those are candidates, any of those brokers in that firm, as long as they don't know confidential information about the seller, they are all candidates to become a designated buyer agent if needed, right? But by default, until that happens, they are a dual agent. They are limited, just like the listing agent is if the buyer calls them off of the sign and ends up being a dual agent. And then don't get confused and think that dual agency or true dual agency is always just one broker. It can be multiple. And what is so easy to mess up is if the test question talks about two brokers in dual agency, the word designated is nowhere in sight, but people start answering the question as if it's a designated dual. You get me? Don't assume just because it's two brokers that all of a sudden means it's designated. They're going to have to tell you that it's designated. They'll use the word. If they don't use the word, it's not what's going on. Don't answer as such. If they don't use the word designated, then it's a true dual agency situation, meaning loyalty's off the table. Loyalty's gone. Can't give either side an advantage. Buyer says, well, you've given me these comparables, these sold properties that are like this one, but I don't know what that means. What does this mean? Help me interpret these comparable sales to figure out what I should offer. I can't help you with that. I'm a dual agent. You let me be that, so therefore that's the limitation. So it works on both sides. The seller and the buyer they really both need to understand. And in dual agency, this explanation, it can be given orally for only the amount of time that a buyer agency explanation and arrangement can be an oral buyer agency. You need to talk about dual agency in oral buyer agency let them know what those options are. And you don't have to have that in writing yet, but you do. It falls under the same guidelines as oral buyer agency. Once you reduce the oral buyer agency agreement to writing, the dual agency discussion needs to be put into writing and their permission to let you or not. And conveniently, there's a little section in the buyer agency agreement that talks about dual and designated agency and whether you're going to be allowed to do it or not. That's if you even want to, by the way, because it's up to you and your firm whether you even allow it or even choose to do it. You may say, look, there's this thing called dual agency, but we don't do that here. And that is okay. And it's a darn good reason why you might not want to. Probably not too hard to talk them out of doing it or to explain and have them not. Nobody's going to say, please, please, oh, please do it. They pretty much aren't going to care. The only time they might care is if it significantly affects how much the commission amount ends up being. And that's really the reason that people compromise and go ahead and agree to dual agency and give up this loyalty, is because it probably means the only agent now, the dual agent person, is going to charge 4 instead of 6%. And maybe that seller sells to the buyer at a little lower price and shares the wealth with them a little bit. They're paying less commission, so they're going to sell a little bit less. Now, up front, they're probably not going to do that, but during the negotiating, if they're only $1,000 apart, oh, wait, you're a dual agent here, Neil, and I'm only $1,000 apart from this buyer on this $400,000 house. You know what, Neil, you're supposed to, as a dual agent, you're getting both sides. You're making 6%. How about you just make 5% and we get this deal done and I can give that buyer the price they want and I still net you see what I'm saying? Your money starts becoming on the table as far as they're concerned. Whether you agree to it, you don't have to agree to that, by the way. They might be mad at you. It's a business decision, no right or wrong. But on a $400,000 house at 5%, I'm okay with that. So I probably would just roll with it. Move on with life. It's a numbers game. Let's go on to the next one with a nice paycheck from this one instead of having disgruntled people and zero money, right? So you got to be willing to play with that money a little bit. That's why I don't ever negotiate significantly in the beginning, because I want to leave enough room in my pocket from what I'm getting to solve problems later. And I'm happy to do so, but I'm not happy to do so if I've already agreed to rock bottom commission to myself on the first day. That's why I don't do that limited service type of model. By the way, do you know what a discount broker is? Heard that term, discount broker? A discount broker, you'll hear about it out in the wild now that you're in it. You know, when you get a little red car, brand new red car, you see red cars everywhere. Well, now that you're in the business, you're going to see these words everywhere. And a discount broker is one of those brokers that will list a house for $500 flat fee. You want to have some advertising on Facebook? Then that's going to be another $500. Oh, you want professional photos instead of my iPhone? Then that's another $200. It's a fee for service, a la carte kind of a model. But, thank you, Janina. But we are not allowed to say discount broker. We need to call them limited service brokers, because that's what they're doing. They're limiting their service. They're saying, I'll give you this. I'll charge you less, but I'm going to do less because I'm charging you less. If we call the type of a broker model or a broker a discount broker, it implies discounting from a standard commission. We can't, and there is none. We can't say there's a standard commission rate. They're all negotiable. Therefore, to say a discount broker kind of breaks that rule. So we call them a limited service broker, and that's a valid model. Nothing wrong with that if you want to do it. It's just that it tends to be when you start racing to the bottom, there's always somebody willing to do it for a little less, and just have to accept that and be aware of it and just be willing to work with that. There are some firms that have more of a reputation for cutting commissions than others, from cutting from whatever might be considered a full commission to them. And then remember, while you can't say the industry standard is such and such, you can say my firm charges this or I charge this. This is not allowed. Undisclosed dual agency. Everybody needs to know that dual agency is happening. So if you're helping a buyer buy a house listed by a seller, like seller selling their own house for sale by owner, as much as that seller is going to inevitably like you because you're so darn likable and approachable, that's kind of why you're in this business, they're going to maybe start being friendly towards you, and that's okay, but they're going to maybe start trying to confide in you or maybe even asking advice, and you need to make sure they understand and keep reminding them, look, don't tell me anything that you don't want the buyer to know. I like you more than my buyer too. To be honest, you don't have to say that, but it might be true. But I'm representing them. I owe it all to them. Only thing I owe to you is disclosure if their loan doesn't go through, for instance, and reasonable skill and care. I'm showing you what forms to use. I'm even maybe pointing out which blanks to fill and how to fill them out. But you need to figure out what you want to counter with. You would guide them through the disclosure, for instance. Reasonable skill and care, provide that RPODES disclosure and help them fill it out. Not physically, not actually, but answer their questions as they're filling it out. But if you don't keep reminding them, if you let them go on thinking, oh, you know what, I'm going to keep my mouth shut and let them confide in me since they like me so much, and then I'm going to report it to my buyer. That would be what is not allowed. That won't work. Oh, looks like break time. Let's come on back at 10:02. 10:02. Last couple of things as a recap. How do we tell them? How do we bring up this topic of agency and who we are representing and how they could possibly hire us, how we might represent them? What is that thing called when we need to talk to them about how agency works? A working with agents disclosure, and at what point do we need to address it? At first initial contact? Do we need to talk about it at first initial contact? Careful. I used a word that sounded official. The last three letters were the same. There it is. First initial contact might be something you see on the test, but that just means, hello, my name is Neil. Initial contact does not trigger this requirement. Substantial contact does. First substantial contact means what? What do we mean by first substantial contact? The M words, 2 M words. Yeah, motivation and money. You got it. If they tell you something about their ability financially, I'm qualified for 400, I have 300 in cash, that's a money first substantial contact issue. If they say I must be out by the fall, by October, my company's buying me out, or I have to be transferred, or I have to sell, or I have to buy, have to, must, those sorts of words imply or indicate motivation. If they say I'd kind of like to move in the summer, that is not something that would trigger the need to talk about the disclosure. Although it's not a bad idea to talk about the disclosure sooner than later. But it's like drop dead no later than first substantial contact. Need to stop talking about the Panthers, oh, poor Panthers, and go ahead and address the money and motivation, right? That is the deadline for substantial contact. And then if it's in person, obviously, you're going to explain how agency works. You're going to show them the disclosure. There's a one page for sellers and there's a one page for buyers. You're going to just go right down through it. It walks you right through it. And please sign here at the bottom. What if they won't sign? What do you do if they refuse to sign it? I don't sign anything on the first day I just met you. Not signing it. What do you do? Give them a cookie because they're very angry elves. Yes. Oh, yeah, okay. Sorry. Let me use a different. There we go. Let's do that one. So if they refuse, what do we do? I won't sign it. I won't sign this disclosure. And it's right there on the disclosure. It says this is not a contract. This is just for me to have proof. If the real estate commission ever asks me if I explain things to you, I need to have proof that I did. And that's what this is. Oh, I don't care. I'm not signing it. Why should I help you? You just need to initial, sign, make a note of it so that you can have that document to include in the file. Even without their signature, you tried, but just say I tried. They wouldn't sign it. Date, maybe the time, right? Date and time. Now you have it for your file. Now the commission comes down to audit the files in your firm and they see this one. They're going to be happy that this document is in there. Even without the client's signature, it has your explanation of what went on because you can't force them to sign it. If you are not face-to-face, if it's maybe via phone or email or text and you're going back and forth and then they're starting to share money or motivation things, now you need to talk about first working with agents disclosure. Talk about it, right? Disclose who you represent right now. Talk about how they could hire you and then send them the paperwork, the disclosure, no later than 3 days. How about immediately since you can, since it's probably by email, but this goes back to the snail mail days. So yeah, put it in the envelope, lick it, stamp it, send it, get it to them within 3 days. That's kind of why that rule is there, but everybody's going to do it immediately. The sooner the better. But then that does not let you off the hook. When you do finally get face to face with them, the commission says you need to bring it up again. Don't just ignore it, forget it, because let's explain it one more time now that you are in the ideal circumstance of being face to face with them. And by the way, it helps you get in front of this bus. There's no way it's not better for you to go ahead and be brave enough to deal with this now. It's not you who made the rules. You're just the messenger. And it's benefiting them, it's benefiting you, for everybody to know up front. But it's too tempting sometimes for agents that aren't very confrontational. I can imagine being afraid for confrontation in this business. It's not going to serve you well. But many agents don't want to have this conversation. They don't want to bring it up again, and they just let it linger. And then, oh, by the way, 6 months ago, remember we talked? No, I don't remember, because you just kind of brushed past it in about 3 seconds. I have proof of that. Every CE class I teach, 80% of them saying, yeah, I've talked to clients before, and they said, you're the first person that has explained the working with agents disclosure to me. Happens all the time. Doesn't matter until it does, until the commission comes down and says, did you explain, do you have proof? And people just don't. Then you've got some disciplinary action facing you. So we're going to just deliver it, provide it, explain it, make sure they understand it, and then determine if you're going to work together. And then you use a different form to set that relationship up, depending on what the agreement is. Is it a listing? Is it a buyer? But mainly just make sure they know to not tell you any secrets until they have your protection through Old Car, through the fiduciary responsibilities. Okay, let's get on into the sort of the nuts and bolts of this. It's called Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is where we go into those documents. The actual agency contracts. Here we go. Should be about page 192 in your textbook, or 36 in the syllabus. Our objectives here are some level ones. The level 1 categories are laws affecting solicitation and employment contracts between broker firms and their affiliated licensees. Those are all level 1, like what does this mean kind of thing. The level 2 is MLS, what that's about, antitrust laws. And then the level 3, we got a handful of level 3 in this. We need to know the ins and outs, deep dive into these topics, earning a brokerage fee. Yeah, that's pretty important. In fact, I have a feeling you're going to have no trouble with this math. Somehow, when it's about the money in your pocket, it's like, oh, light bulb, got it, no problem. And then requirements for agency contracts, and then what is about listing agreements and the practices, best practices, as well as buyer agency agreements. First of all, we have a real estate commission rule. It's called 104. But by the way, if I haven't told you already, I think I have. You will not be tested on the numbers of the rules. They won't say, hey, what does Rule 104 say? It's just a place for you to go back and look at the whole thing and make a note. Rule 104, go find it, go read the whole thing. It says agency agreements must be signed by the parties, include the broker's license number. We saw that today on the back page of the listing agreement. Have a definite termination date. That's in there too. Every testable question, every agency agreement must have an expiration date. You cannot have a forever, for your entire life, perpetual agency agreement. Every listing agreement, every buyer agency agreement, property management, tenant representation, helping a renter, all of it has to die. There's got to be a expiration in there. And then all agency agreements, another highly testable question. All agency agreements must have non-discrimination language. And it's all written the same way. It's usually bold. It's usually very conspicuous. And it says, we are not going to conduct ourselves in this real estate business in violation of the federal protected classes of familial status, race, religion, sex, handicap, color, national origin. I think that's 7. We'll learn those in chapter 19. Very conspicuous, all agency agreements. We've got to tell everybody, look, we're not going to discriminate in real estate and violate these protected classes, these federal protected 7 federal protected classes. In fact, in the agency agreements, there's actually 2 more. The 7 federally protected classes, and then because we are realtors and because realtors wrote these agency agreements, the standard forms that we use, they've added gender, sexual orientation and gender identity in with those protected classes. You know what? We don't care what anybody believes in, looks like, came from. We're going to help you. Money is green. How about that? It gets right down to, that's pretty much the essence, right? And they hold us, the commission holds us to a standard of making sure people understand this. It's good to explain this thoroughly up front because you want to weed out the ones that might not feel that way. Much better to weed out the bigots on day 1, hour 1, than 40 hours into it and you've got like time and money on the line and it's like, ugh, now I got to walk away from you because I found out this. So it needs to identify the parties, obviously, who's representing who. I mean, if we all got together and didn't know a thing about license law and we said we need to come up with a form so that when an agent is hired, what does it needs to be on that form? Well, the people involved, clearly. And then what happens if it goes wrong? What if you do it wrong? What if somebody needs to complain about an agent? Well, let's have a handy dandy reference to their license number so that when they complain to the commission, they can say it's this person. This is the one who did it wrong. Here's their license number. It's right here on the agency agreement. Got to have that license number, your own as well as the firm's. And then must have an end date. There's a little difference when it comes to property management. There's an option in a property management agreement to have an automatic renewal. Because if you think about it, if you own a couple of properties and you want to hire somebody to run them for you, do you really want to hire a different new person every year? If they're doing it well and doing it right, I'm just going to ride it out and let them keep doing it for the entire time. So therefore you could, and it's allowable to have in the property management agency agreement, this renews until I say it doesn't. But all the other ones have a definite expiration. And then this thing, got to have that fair housing language. You'll see it referred to as fair housing, federal protected classes. This is an actual logo that we should include in our marketing. Because if you do get in trouble for somebody accusing you of violating, not just because they accuse you doesn't mean you did it, by the way. If they accuse you of violating fair housing laws, if you don't have any peep of this logo in anything that you've used to promote yourself, it's going to look like maybe this person does have a problem violating protected classes, violating federal protected classes and fair housing laws. So the commission says, let's put this wherever. Put it on your signs, put it on your cards, make sure people know that you are holding yourself to the standard of making housing equal and available to everyone. So it needs to have that language in it saying that we're going to behave that way. What's the purpose of a listing agreement? Who does it benefit? The seller or the broker? Who do you think cares more that it exists in writing? If I'm a seller and you're an agent and I'm hiring you to help me, if I could get away with it, I'd be just fine not signing anything and let you go ahead and do your work. And it reserves the freedom to me to just say, you know what, just stop. I'm done with you. And you say, well, no, you promised. Yeah, okay, prove it. Where is it in writing? Right? That listing agreement is pretty much an employment contract to benefit the firm, the broker. Right? It doesn't really benefit. I mean, yeah, it spells out what you're going to do for the seller, but the benefit of a listing of any agency agreement is some protection for that agent, for that broker, for that firm, for the time and effort they're putting in. It gives you proof that you did it and that person agreed to pay you at some point. The owner hires the firm. You're agreeing to market their property and look for buyers. That takes time and energy and expertise. And why set yourself up to not have that as the result, right? If you remember, this realtor designation means that the licensee is paying money to a trade group to have their name behind your name. Neil Pender, Realtor. Realtor. Not real estate agent, although I am one, but realtor. In fact, the way you could say it is, not all real estate agents are realtors, but all realtors are real estate agents, right? We've chosen to join and maintain a membership to this National Association of Realtors. And then by default, some of those dues you're paying also go to the state, the North Carolina Association of Realtors. And then there's a local board as well. It's split up amongst all of those. And they all benefit you. The national one benefits you because they stand up for your side to legislation that might be put into place that could hurt the industry. So you can donate to the NAR because they have pretty strong lot of members, and they're sort of an action group on your behalf to benefit you who work in the industry. You know, there are some politicians that would love to just tax transactions like crazy, and that could hurt the industry and hurt you by default. So joining the Realtor Board comes with that benefit. It also comes with, it's tied closely in with the MLS membership and the forms. That's the other big one. The forms that we use, the ones that I gave you, the listing form we looked at this morning, all of those forms were written as a collaboration between the realtor, the NCAR, North Carolina Association of Realtors, and the NC Bar. Who's the NC Bar? Attorneys of North Carolina. So our North Carolina attorneys and realtor group collaborated and said, hey, let's write some documents for the realtors to use. And therefore, only people who are attorneys or realtors of North Carolina are allowed to use them. These things. If I can. There we go. So here's one. The listing agreement we were just looking at. If you look at the bottom of the page, it's got the Realtor R on it. And oh, by the way, it's got that equal housing opportunity logo on it. So that's what we are allowed to use. In other words, especially when it comes to this guy, the offer to purchase and contract, wouldn't it be nice when you find a for sale by owner that you go and try to have an excuse to go talk to them because maybe they'll give up and be willing to list their house with you. So to earn some goodwill with them, wouldn't it be nice just to give them a copy of this so that if they do get a buyer in the meantime, they'll have an offer they can use? Well, that would be nice, but it is not okay. It's not allowed. You could certainly give them something like this because it has the word sample on it and they can't use it, actually truly use it. They could just be inspired to figure out what should be in a contract. But an unrepresented seller selling to an unrepresented buyer should not use this. They're not allowed to use this. And there are agents who give these out without the word sample on them, and they do get used, and that's not okay. If a broker is involved in the transaction, if a realtor, I should say, is involved in the transaction, then yes, you can use it. But if there's no realtor in sight in that transaction, this should not be used. Well, what can be used? A napkin. They can write the contract on a piece of paper. Office Depot, is that still a thing? You can get generic things. You could have an attorney draft one, or maybe even an attorney who's feeling nice gives you just a plain one that maybe they just have access to, and they say, hey, here it is. Or they could charge them to write a custom one. But only in this testable, only realtors are allowed to use these realtor documents. But these are not the only forms we're allowed to use. Did you catch that? Sort of like that thing about all realtors are brokers, but not all brokers are realtors. We use these forms because they're pretty well written. They're pretty fair to both sides, and they're convenient and available, and we pay to be along to the association, and it's one of the perks. But if our seller says, no, I'm not using that form. I have an attorney, and they drafted up a nice 97-page contract that I would rather use. Well, then you use that one. If your client wants you to use a certain one, as long as you're involved and it meets certain criteria, minimum criteria, you can use it. You don't have to only use this one. But this is the one most of us use. In new construction, we don't tend to use it because that builder has hired an attorney to write a contract specific to their needs. And by the way, those new construction builder contracts are very pro builder side. They are lopsided. They benefit the builder more than they benefit the buyer because that's who paid to have them written. And you can be a part of that. You can be involved in that transaction. It doesn't have to be a form with this R on it. But in a typical resale transaction, these tend to be the ones that we use. And there's a bunch of them. This is obviously the offer to purchase. There's the listing, and then there's a whole bunch of addenda. We'll talk about addenda. There's also amendments, things that we need to use to add to and to change the offers and the contracts. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. So, because you are a realtor member, you already know the laws and rules that the Real Estate Commission requires of you as a licensee. You have a real estate license. You've got to follow the laws and the rules. But now you've decided to join the Realtor Association, so that comes with it another level, a code of ethics, the Realtor Code of Ethics. Remember, what is it that the main goal is of the Real Estate Commission? What's the Real Estate Commission there for? To protect who? Real Estate Commission, they don't care so much about you fussing with another agent about who earned the commission. They're not going to help you work that dispute out with another agent. But if the consumer has a problem, Ashley, yeah, they're there to protect the consumer. That's what they care about. They don't care that you think that other agent across town should not have earned the commission because you worked with that person first. That's not a Real Estate Commission matter. That would be a Realtor Association matter. Take it up with the Realtor Board and have a dispute. Have some sort of a arbitration, perhaps. So this code of ethics has all kinds of stuff. And in Article 16 of the code of ethics, and by the way, you will have an orientation when you join, and you'll learn all about the various parts of the code of ethics. You're elevating yourself to a higher standard. Article 16 says you're not going to try to steal clients from other agents. That's what these fancy legal words mean. Tortious interference with contractual relations means you're not going to poach. Right? Your neighbor 2 doors down, she knows that you're studying for this test because you talked to her at the block party or at the cul-de-sac or at the meeting, HOA or whatever. She knows this. But darn it, that week you get the license, you look down the street and there's a sign in the yard. She didn't tell you she wanted to sell, and she had the nerve to list with somebody else, and she knows that you just got your license and you could have helped her. So you march on down there, you knock on that door for your morning tea, but this time you're mad and you say, look, you know I'm in the business just now. I just got my cards and we're friends. Fire them and hire me. You just interfered with contractual relations. Can't poach. And that's a silly example, but it's kind of could happen. I could see. In fact, on television, on a reality show of all places, the mom was a real estate agent. Her daughter, newly legal adult, decided to buy or sell. She had a condo. I think they gave it to her. She wanted to sell it. She was talking to a broker, listed with someone, and the mom said, on TV, on the show, the mom said, you need to let them go and hire me. I'm like, wow. There's some dumb agents in this business that would go on national TV committing tortious interference with contractual relations if she's a realtor, and I assume that she is, right? I did not turn her in. None of my business. But that's what this means. We can't poach clients. We can't steal. We can't solicit other people's clients. Because think about what kind of depths this thing would sink to if we didn't have a code of ethics. And when somebody is a realtor, you know, okay, well, at least they're going to subscribe or work toward this code of ethics. They're going to behave a little better, I hope. Sometimes they don't. But at least they're saying they will. They're paying money, a lot of money every year to adhere to this code of ethics. But you don't have to join. What if you don't join the Realtor Association? What forms are you going to use? Not the R ones that we just looked at. You got to find another source of forms. It causes issues. So most people join. Most firms are going to require you to join because they are realtor members. So they require you to be realtor members. This is a big one in real life, guys, because people do this all the time. There's 80,000. I just recounted. I think it's settled in right now at about 78,000 active brokers in North Carolina. And with that much competition, a lot of them are doing some old school methods to get business, like cold calling, door knocking. You better believe when they're on the phone with somebody and they find out, oh yeah, I just signed the papers. I just listed a house. I'm going to be putting it on. Oh wait, well, you know what? I'll do it for less. I could imagine in my, what's the word? Jaded. What's the other word? Where you expect the worst of people. I can see on a phone call or in an in-person door knock, they're trying to just wiggle their way right in there, even though somebody has actually signed or talked them into firing somebody to hire them. By the way, speaking of this is another one of those examples where you're trying to adhere to the rules and laws and you're thinking, well, surely this is a thing. What if somebody has listed their house with an agent and that agent maybe for some reason has disappointed them and they call you because they see your sign down the street or a postcard that you mailed out? Somehow their friend told them about you and you did such a great job. What if they reach out to you or another broker and they say, you know what, come talk to me right now. I want you to come to my house and tell me what you do because I'm going to fire my current agent or I'm thinking about it. Are you allowed to go and talk to them? If they call you. That's the safe answer, but you are allowed to. It is actually in the agency agreement. As long as they called you, you can't solicit them, But if they called you to come talk about listing their house, you can go do it. You can go talk to them. And then it's just that you can't be the one who interfered, who took the initiative, who was proactive about it. They can bring you in, say, hey, what would you do? This person just keeps dropping the ball. What if I hire you? Now, the next step to that is, how are they going to go about this firing? Can they fire them? No. They would have to ask them to let them out of the listing agreement. Or, best case for you in this situation is it's about to expire. And if it expires with that other one, it's done, period, because every agency agreement has to have an expiration. So hopefully that's the case. And you don't have to worry about them hoping that they can be let out of it so that you can come in and list it. Maybe it expires next week and they're just getting their ducks in a row, getting ready for the next person because they're not going to re-up when it expires, right? The do not call list. Anybody getting calls? I'm getting texts, a lot more texts than I used to get. All kinds of spammy texts. And it's not okay. It's so annoying. My text inbox used to be so neat and clean. And I'm the worst. If I showed you my email inbox, I would be embarrassed. It's thousands, but I just made your heads explode. Some of you who have a perfectly empty box at the end of the night when you go to bed. But the texting is like, oh, what is this? I don't remember even talking about, Alexa eavesdropping on me about this thing that is showing up. Can we call for business? Can we make cold calls? Yes. But you can't call the people on this list, right? Just like they're not supposed to be calling you. There are plenty of agents out there who get lists of people's names and numbers and they start calling. And they might not even be calling people that have shown any interest in real estate. They could certainly call a for sale by owner or an expired listing, a listing that is recently expired from the market, and have an expectation that that person might still want to sell. But I mean, some people just straight up basically call out of the phone book. You see, a phone book is this thing that people, I'm just kidding, call off of straight up, oh, this person, here's their number. So here's the rules about the do not call list. If the person is on the do not call list, you can still call them under these situations. If they bought something with you, you had a purchase, you had a transaction with them, then you can still call them even if they're on the do not call list for 18 months after the last time that they had that transaction. Yes, Margie. Stepping stool, booster seat in the car. We use phone books for some things. 18 months after the last purchase, you can still call that person even if they're on the do not call list. Now, side note to that, I would hope that during your transaction, you at least attain some level of friendliness, that they wouldn't turn you in for having called them. But we're just talking about the rules here. The rules of the do not call list are you can still call them for 18 months if you had a purchase with them, if you had a transaction with them. You can also call them for 3 months after they have inquired with you about a thing. This weekend, I had to kind of revamp my website. And so I spent the whole weekend kind of making it pretty and stuff. And I put in an email, enter your email for a newsletter kind of thing. And I'm going to put other call to action. Hey, do you want a special report about how to sell your house yourself or whatever? If they plug in, or here's a very common one, I'll put your information in here and I'll tell you what your house is worth. Free CMA, free market analysis. That's a very common one. I probably won't put that on there because it's so common. But any sort of inquiry that they might make like that, because they gave me their info, then I can reach out to them even if they're on the do not call list. I can do it for 3 months from that inquiry, right? So the test question says, can you call somebody on the do not call list? Yes. Give me more information. It would never only be that much information. They would spell out the months. Oh, it was 20 months ago you helped them and you closed on a sale. Nope, then you can't call them because the rule is 18 months. 4 months ago, they made an inquiry on your website. Nope, can't call them because it needs to be within 3 months. You with me? Can't call to solicit listings if that for sale by owner is on the do not call list. Now, here's the thing about for sale by owners. There are some agents who lie to for sale by owners and tell them, oh, I have a buyer. I just need to come see your house, see if it's going to work for them. And what they're really doing is they're trying to sneak their way in and tell them whatever they want to hear to get in the door so they can do a surprise attack listing appointment. That for sale by owner has not expressed any interest in listing with you. That's why the sign says for sale by owner. And you're going there under the false pretenses that you have a buyer so that you can try to win them over with your charm. And hopefully, when they finally give up selling it themselves, they'll list with you. That is not okay. Commission says don't do that. You better have a real buyer. If they got in trouble, if they reported you, you better be able to point to an actual buyer who would attest to, yep, yeah, she was working with me, and I did want her to look into that for sale by owner on my behalf. I don't know if it would ever get that far, but it doesn't matter until it does it? And I don't want to be there when it goes wrong. So you can't call to solicit for sale by owners. You are allowed to call for sale by owners as long as you have a buyer who might be interested, a real one. But you're not allowed to call listings of other firms. Can't solicit listings that are already listed by other firms. Now, that's calling. That's the phone. And it works. Cold calling, as long as they're not on this list. Now, by the way, some brokers gamble. Some brokers say, you know what? Okay, do not call list, whatever. It's only like a $40,000 fine if I get caught. And what are the odds of getting caught? Not odds that I want to play. But there is no do not knock list. And there is no do not spend money to the U.S. Postal Service and mail things to people list. And there is no do not email list. There are other nuances about that, but there's not you absolutely can't do this. Now, if you go there intending to knock and you see a no solicitation sign, some people are still going to knock. But you're going to be starting off kind of on the wrong foot. Now, but the point is, you are allowed to knock. Get off your tail, go out there, sweat, walk through the neighborhood, meet some people, maybe. Talk to your BIC about it. Safety. Figure out the safety elements, right? Don't just go anywhere. Don't just go by yourself, all kinds of things. But legally, yes, allowed. And you can mail things. Isn't it funny that the do not call list is sort of a government thing, but the government said, nope, we're not going to put a limitation on sending spammy mail. How do you open your mail? You know, that snail mail, where do you open it? Over the garbage can, right? Because 90% of it is just trash. They'll never require that to not be the case, right? You can mail things as long as you want to pay for it. And it's a valid way to do stuff. There are agents who do what's called farming, and they will pick a neighborhood. Maybe it's the one they live in. Maybe it's the one nicer than where they live, and they adopt it. And they put a mailing, they send postcards out to everybody. It could be recipes. It could be free market analysis. It could be free report, whatever. Now, what people do wrong is they send it like 2 months and they give up. If you're not only going to send it 2 months, then don't ever send it, period. It's not enough. You've got to commit to a year, the people who are successful. It needs to be a thing that you do after you've done other things. Just sort of icing on the cake. If you want to have a mailing campaign, you better already be good at like phone calls and stuff and work in the people that already love you, take people to lunch, call people who love you. Then eventually, okay, let's start mailing. Let's add in the mailing regularly component. How often do you mail? That's a whole other ballgame, but you're allowed to do it. You could spend thousands of dollars a month mailing postcards to people. You could get creative and mail it in envelopes that look like it's from a friend with fake handwriting on the front so people open it at least for that 2-second exposure to the thing you just sent. Make it look like a fancy letter or a friendly letter if you want to pay for it. There's bulk mail rates. There's all kinds of stuff, and you can get lists and send it and put it in certain packaging, make it easy on the USPS, and they'll charge you a little bit less for each stamp. But that's what it comes. It comes at a cost. And then the email. By the way, you can also fax things. Who's ready? I'll sell you a course on how to fax your way to $1 million in real estate. No, I won't. What is the fax? No. But if you do, if you send a fax or if you send an email, what do you have to include in that fax or in that email? You can send an email. I just did it this weekend, trying to drum up business for a class coming up. To 2,500 people, I emailed through MailChimp. But on that email, it had to have an option to unsubscribe. You bet. Thank you, Twee. And it was, my case, it was a friendly list, a list of past students, people that are, and we don't do it regularly, but got to have an option to unsubscribe. And some people did. Out of 2,500, I think 11 people unsubscribed. Some people unsubscribed just as a pattern, just as a way of just doing business to keep that inbox empty. So these are not prohibited. Mailing is not prohibited. Door knocking is not prohibited. Email, faxing are not prohibited, but the emails and faxes have to have an unsubscribe. Now, what if a broker out of state, let's say a Virginia broker, nice and close by, or South Carolina broker, calls you and says, I want you to take care of my grandma. She's going to move there, relocate there. Will you pay me a referral fee if I give you my grandma as a client? You could say yes. I'll be glad to pay you a referral fee and take great care of your grandmother. Send her on down. And if that agent in Virginia says, okay, we'll be there tomorrow. I'm going to drive her there myself. I'm going to ride around in the car with you while you show her houses. You could say, well, come on down. I'm happy for you to do so, because if that happens, I'm not going to pay you a commission or a referral fee because I'm not allowed to. If they come with her, if they step foot in the state, you cannot pay them a referral fee. It's a commission rule. Because think about this. Is that person going to be able to not give grandma real estate advice when they come here with her? Right? You showed them 25 houses. They got back to the hotel that night. There's no chance in the world they're not going to give grandma some real estate advice, but they don't have a North Carolina license. They're not allowed to give her real estate advice. We're talking about North Carolina real estate, not Virginia real estate. They're not allowed to do it. So you can't pay them a referral fee. You got to make sure they understand that. Look, yes, go ahead, come on down, but I can't give you a referral fee if that's what you do. If you want me to give you the referral fee, stay home. I'll still take good care of grandma. Send her by Uber or fly her down here or whatever. If she's in South Carolina in Fort Mill, I'll come get her, right? In order to compensate an out-of-state broker, that broker must have an active license in the state of their residence, but they must stay there. They can't be involved. They can't give advice because they will do it, because that would be called brokerage activity in North Carolina without a license. Can't look at the houses. Now, when grandma gets back to the hotel, they stayed home like you told them they're supposed to. Is she going to call them and talk to them? That's nothing you can do about, right? Just make sure she didn't tell you. But you can't pay them a referral fee if they come and engage in brokerage activities in North Carolina. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. You want to make sure that they have an expertise, a level of knowledge and familiarity. Is that what it is? Fair. Right. Right. Well, I would say if they do have the license and it's going to depend on your relationship with them, but it sounds like you've already figured it out. If you feel like that they're going to really be pressuring you to let them help you and you just don't feel good about it, then I probably wouldn't even open that can of worms. I'd find my own South Carolina agent. Yeah. If they should though be reasonable about it, but I know people just aren't. But the proper thing, oh yeah. Oh yeah. Right. Right. Sure. Right. Well, it's smarter for them if you think they would at least be remotely reasonable about it. Give them a shot to at least make a referral fee off of it and connect you, because they have ways to find other brokers. It could be through designations they share with them. Some of those letters behind agents' names, like CRS, Certified Residential Specialist, or investor designations. And maybe through those types of groups, they've got a good one. It's so much nicer to not roll the dice to find a good agent, because the agent already has kind of vetted them. That's what I do when I need to refer an agent to someone who's moving to Michigan or wherever. I'll spend an hour looking up agents, trying to figure it out based on their little resume and their website. What's a good match? I found one for my buddy. My buddy has an Asperger's child, and I found one that's gives to special needs and the spectrum kind of charities. And the guy's a former basketball player in Europe, and my buddy's a huge fan. I found all these little, similarities. But then he ended up not using the guy because he took some referral from the person at their new church, and she was terrible. Doesn't matter where they come from. Sometimes, I think my guy would have taken great care of him because he had also attained a certain level of success. That's part of what I look at too, is track record. When I'm setting someone up for a referral, putting my name on it, I tell you, you should probably use this person. You better believe I'm going to try really hard to make sure. And then 6 months when it's all done and I forgot I earned it, here comes that check. So it's good to know your role, know your limitations. Even in this market in Charlotte, 50-mile radius from Pineville to Kannapolis to Rowan County to Salisbury, that's a huge distance. And you don't have any business going from one end of that to the other. You can figure out the values through the MLS pretty easy, but the things like the landfills and the nuisances and the zoning changes, you better have a good way to be up on that stuff. Why don't you just drop back and punt and make a referral fee for not having to do anything except making the introduction, doing some research up front, and then you're done. So a good agent's going to already know that and do their business that way. But if you're getting the intuition that this person might angle and really want to try, even not selfishly, but trying to just help you and feel bad for not being able to help you, then I'd go through other measures and try to find them. Something called the Sherman antitrust laws are in place to keep various things from happening. One of them is to keep any firm from having a monopoly of business, preventing monopolies that limit competition, because again, that comes down and affects the consumer. If the consumer only gets to use one phone company, not fair, because that phone company is inevitably going to charge more and more and more, or internet, or does this sound familiar? It's nothing that would ever happen, is it? And it's enforced by the FTC, Federal Trade Commission. Sherman antitrust laws in real estate. That's the thing that gives us the rule that we can't talk about a standard commission because it's considered price fixing. Oh, the standard is 6%. Everybody charges 6%. I see it all the time on Facebook groups, in videos. People just make this mistake and say it wrong all the time. The industry cannot set fees or commissions across the industry. It's unfair to the consumer. The consumer has the right to negotiate and compare and shop. But a company can say, this is what we charge. We only charge 6%, period. We do not negotiate, and that is allowed. But that company can't say, as does everybody else in the business across the board, all my competitors, we all charge. No, that would be price fixing. That's a standard that is not allowed. Whether it's a realtor association or a group of brokerage firms, maybe little boutique firms that get together and try to stand up to the bigger firms, and they say, this is our little core group and we charge this. No. Firm to firm, broker to broker, you can set your own rate and tell everybody, but you can't combine groups. Make groups of individual brokers, groups of firms, realtor, MLS, and say, here is the standard. So when they being the consumer or anyone out there, ask this question, what is the standard commission? Now your answer is There is none. No such thing. Everybody, it's negotiable. Find out what they'll charge you, and it is honestly negotiable for me. I'll charge one amount if you're a one-off. If you're just going to use me to sell your house, I'm going to charge you a certain commission. I don't even know what that is right now because it goes back to, where'd he go? You all know what's coming. Oh boy. Okay, it's over. I ruined the moment. It depends. When they call me and say, what do you charge? I don't even tell them a number because I don't know. I don't know what I'm getting myself into until I've seen it in person. They might think it's ready to go, but it's nowhere close to ready to go. And if I've quoted my commission rate plus a price estimate, that's just crazy. Then I get there and I'm expected to honor it, and I'm at the very least not going to because it's impossible, and now I look bad, right? So what's the standard commission? There's no standard. I charge this, but in my case, I'm going to say, how could I don't know. I haven't seen your house yet. All commissions are negotiable. And by the way, sometimes they say, come list my house. And you say, nope, not interested. If you get there, you figure out that it's in terrible shape and they're not willing to do anything to fix it. And this is a market where you don't get away with that. And you're just getting into a big problem. And we're going to have a break in just a second. Then sometimes you just need to walk away. I walked away from a $400,000 listing because they thought it was a $500,000 listing. I went there and looked at it. It was dated, had a pool that didn't even work, but it was still there. So at the very least, they needed to spend 5 figures getting rid of the pool or renovate it, revitalize it for maybe half that or maybe as much. The house itself with this huge open 2-story foyer that went from, it's a shotgun house, but it was back in its day, a big party pad, amazing, gorgeous tile countertops, which are terrible now, but back then were great, but they were broken. On the right, when you went in the front door, there was like a half wall and it looked like a Motel 6, the 3 guest bedrooms and a bathroom. It was just terrible. Needed so much work. And my math said 400,000. But they wanted 5, and I'd made a business decision. Sorry, agree to disagree. Good luck to you. Walked away. 3 years later, I was pricing something else in that area for that similar kind of range, and that house showed up as a recently sold comparable. And what do you think it had finally sold for like a month earlier than that, which would have been 3 years later than my appointment with them? How much do you think they got? $375, because it is also a known phenomenon in this business that if you price it wrong, you'll probably end up getting less than if you'd priced it right. So yeah, they would have gotten 4 probably with me if they'd done it right then at that time, but because they priced it so high, it had to come down over time. People thought, oh, that's overpriced. What else is wrong with it? Sometimes people think that things have been on the market a long time, not just because it's overpriced, but because there's other things wrong. That's their first assumption. Me and Margie and other brokers, our first assumption when something is sitting is, oh, it's priced wrong. But the general public thinks, oh, it must have like nuclear termites or something, right? So that's just the hazard. So I walked away. And the question is, the agent that they did hire, or multiples, I didn't even bother to look, how much time did they spend and waste? Yeah, okay, they got paid $375, but did they do enough work to constitute like 6 other deals they could have been doing in the meantime? Right? We'll talk about boycotting when we come back from break. Let's come back at 11:05. Good job. Something else that the Sherman antitrust laws prohibit is something called boycotting. Let's just imagine that there was a real estate website out there. And this real estate website started out saying, look, guys, If you just give us permission, we're going to put your listings on our website and get all kinds of extra traffic for you and your sellers. And so you sign a piece of paper allowing that to happen. And that real estate website grows into this huge monster, and they end up eventually buying houses, and they end up becoming a brokerage themselves, and they end up offering these price quotes called Zestimates. True story. I'm muted. Sorry. Oh, rookie mistake. Oh, I had such a good example going. Okay, let me see if I can recreate it. Thank you. The Sherman antitrust laws prohibit boycotting. And that means this. Let's just say that a real estate website starts out. There's a real estate website, and they say, look, guys, we will give all kinds of exposure to your listings if you just give us permission to put your listings on our website. And so a lot of agents do that. They sign a piece of paper allowing this site, this new kid on the block, to put their listings on there, and it grows and gets huge. And this company starts buying houses, and they end up becoming a brokerage firm themselves, and they provide these valuation estimates that they call Zestimates. And that's how Zillow was born. All from back in the day, they said, hey, give us permission to put your listings on our site. And now they're enormous. What if agents who, for any reason, are not happy at Zillow got together and said, ugh, don't use them, they're terrible? That's boycotting. And you have to be super careful. And I use that example because agents are doing it. There are various things that people are disgruntled about in the business. And if it's something like that and they all start chatting on Facebook, talking about how a company or a site, or when it's another firm, which Zillow now is, that elevated the issue. Back before it became its own firm, yeah, you're just talking trash about a website company. But now it's a firm. And now for agents to talk trash about Zillow is violating this Sherman antitrust law preventing boycotting. So anytime, just say maybe a couple of firms, let's make it a local thing. There's some home inspector, and for some reason, maybe he does some sort of an advertising campaign that they don't like. For any reason, they decide, let's just get together and say we're not going to use them. That's boycotting, and that is not allowed. You can't refuse to use a service provider. You can't group together, band together, and boycott or cancel culture, right? Cancel, boycott against a service provider or not show a certain firm's listings. All of that is illegal. Violates the Sherman antitrust laws. Another thing under Sherman is this. What if, like, let's say 4 boutique firms, and by boutique, they're not your typical, now I can't think of my word, international or national kind of known firm. It's just a local one. Let's say 4 or 5 of them, or any firm, gets together and they say, okay, guys, we're going to own this town together. The 4 of us. Firm A, you get the entire northwest quadrant of Charlotte. Firm B, you get the northeast piece. Firm D, we're not going to come into your territory. You get to market and own that. And firm C, you get the southwest. A won't go into B's territory or into C's or D's, etc. We're going to stay exclusive to our areas. But see, this, of course, harms the consumer, keeps the consumer from having the freedom of choice, the ability to negotiate. They're only limited to what A is willing to do in the northwest, or what D firm is willing to do in the southeast. Oh, D likes to charge 8% commission? Tough. All you can use is D because that's who works this area. That's the idea of this market allocation thing. Firms can't divide up a market and treat it like territories because it ends up hurting the consumer. What happens if you violate Sherman antitrust laws? How about a $100,000 fine on the individual level, $1 million fine on the corporate level, and how about 3 years in prison? Sherman antitrust laws are no joke. We're talking like loan fraud level of penalties and prison time. In loan fraud, prison time is up to 30 years and $1 million fine. Sherman antitrust law, 3 years in prison. That's enough. I'm not happy with 30 or 3. I'm too pretty. Can't be doing that, right? That's Sherman antitrust. No standard, no boycotting, no market allocation. Earning a fee. Earning that commission. Now, everybody in this room, when you explain why you're in the business or why you're interested in being in the business, and I believe it's true, you want to help people, but you also have to pay the bills. So let's talk about that compensation. Testable, highly testable. The broker's compensation is not allowed to be in the contract. Can't be in the offer to purchasing contract. In other words, that offer to purchasing contract is between the buyer and the seller. Your commission is not a part of all of that. That can't be spelled out in the contract. It's between them, not you. But how do we figure out what you get to be paid? Where do we have proof that you're that they owe you something? Oh, that's the listing agreement. Compensation between brokers coming from the seller handled with the listing agreement. Not allowed to be in the offer to purchase. I had a listing last year, and the seller decided to pay the buyer agent, whoever that happened to end up being. I'll pay him 2.5% to the buyer agent. They're paying me a piece, and then they're paying that buyer agent 2.5%. Well, the buyer agent who ended up bringing us an offer that got accepted eventually, but when she brought the offer, she actually wrote in the offer to purchase, see addendum A. An addendum is something that we use to add to the offer. We want to add a provision that's not included in the normal paperwork of an offer. The offer to purchase, the standard one we use with the Realtor R on it, is currently 15 pages. If we want to add a provision that's not encompassed in anywhere within those pages, we need to use something called an addendum. She put an addendum. That addendum said buyer agent to make 3.5 commission. She wanted, maybe it was 3. She wanted 3 instead of the 2.5. And she put it in the offer to purchase. Huge no. That is exactly what this is saying you're not supposed to do. I called her out on it very nicely, and she didn't have a great answer, and makes you kind of wonder who her bick was. What do we need in order to earn a commission? We need an active real estate license, not inactive, and we need a valid written listing contract. If we're listing a property, we need to have proof that we are owed the commission, and that is in the form of this written listing contract, listing agreement. And be payable. We got to be payable by being actively licensed. When have we earned it? You know this one by now. It's this thing, ready, willing, and able. We have fulfilled our duties when we have produced a ready, willing, and able buyer. But that doesn't mean that that's when we get paid. So let's say the closing is going to be, what is it today? It's September 12th. Let's say closing is October 30th. And let's say on October 20th, that lender produces a clear to close letter. Everything looks good. We're going to give them the money. They're an able buyer. There's nothing that can stand in the way unless something just completely crazy happens, like they buy a car to ruin their debt ratios. They're not cutting you a check on the 20th, though. You're waiting 10 more days to get to closing. That's when you're going to get your paycheck, right? When do we get paid? At closing, when the property is transferred after the recording of the deed has happened. Because until then, anything can happen. Another lien could get thrown in the mix, could ruin the whole thing. And the attorney, if you recall, before they do that final recording of the deed, they do one more lien check to make sure no other liens did come in. So when have we earned it is not the same as when we got paid, when we were going to get paid. We've earned it before we got paid to payday. That's just how it works. What are some ways that the commission could be entitled, or a transaction could fall through? It could be if you go on a listing appointment and that person says, yeah, I'm the one on the deed, and you've seen the deed, you looked it up, and there it is. Because we don't really go to great lengths on a listing appointment to see if somebody's married or not. And there's really no easy way to check that. There's just not maybe there is, but it's not just something that we do. We're just going to ask them the question. We're going to ask that seller, are you married? No, we're divorced. Oh, okay. Well, since you're divorced, then the only signature I need is yours. But then you find out that divorce to them means they've been separated for 8 years. They're still amenable because of the kid, but they're practically divorced. Oh, wait. That's not the same as actually divorced. And now you need another signature. You thought you only needed theirs on the listing agreement, but now they're basically still married. Maybe they mentally think of themselves as divorced, but your purposes legally, you do not have a listing agreement if only signature is theirs and they're not officially divorced, right? And what if they say, oh, it's going to be no problem. He'll sign it. He'll do whatever I tell him to because, the kid and blah, blah, blah. Maybe he doesn't want to sign it. Maybe he doesn't like the price that you said you can sell it for, or name it. You name it. Maybe any other myriad reasons that divorced people or nearly divorced people are mad at each other. Spouse won't sign, it could cause the transaction to fall through. There's a defect in the title, and therefore somehow it's not a transferable title. Transaction could fall through. If they can't deliver possession for some reason, maybe the renter won't leave. Maybe the terms are required that aren't in the original listing contract. They pull some stuff out of air or other places. Or the seller and buyer cancel the contract. They just say, let's just not do this. Buyer breaches a sales contract. What the buyer says, nope, not buying it. If the transaction falls through for any of these reasons, you've still earned it if you've produced a ready, willing, and able buyer. But can you get it? Right? What would you have to do to get it? Maybe not something you want to do. Maybe you don't want to sue somebody. There's a phrase called procuring cause. Procuring cause means that you are the one who started the process. You originated a series of events. There was a continuous chain, no break in the continuity, and it resulted in procuring a ready, willing, and able buyer. It's the sort of thing that can come up when another broker maybe worked with that buyer first. Then the buyer unsuccessfully or not very properly tries to fire them or say, oh, no, I don't want to work with you anymore. And they come to you and you don't even know about that other broker, and you go on through and help them from beginning to end, and you get paid. And 3 days later, that broker has their broker in charge send your broker in charge a letter or email or call and say, oh, we were the procuring cause of sale. We still have a agency agreement signed that we didn't agree to let them out of. So that's the sort of dispute that would take place within the realtor board, the local board. Don't call the real estate commission if that happens. They don't care. They care about whether the consumer was okay. As long as that's okay, it's none of their business. You need to call the realtor association and get it worked out. Set up an arbitration, whatever you need to do. That's where that sort of thing is handled. That's agent to agent conflict. I had one. I worked at a firm where it was a big firm with lots of offices, and there was a South Park location, and my location was at the university. And there was a single college-age young lady, and she was at a model home community. She was in the model home of a townhouse community. My friend, who I was working with as a buyer, he was there too. Single guy, college age. Obviously, the radar was on. And he sees this disgruntled, attractive, similarly aged female ticked off in the model home, and he uses that and says, hey, what's going on? Come to find out, her agent drove her up there from South Park in the university area community to show her stuff, but he forgot his lockbox key. It happens. She was annoyed by that, but not mad about that. It was because other things, it was sort of had come to a head. He apparently, according to her, had been condescending more often than not, had sort of dropped the ball. In fact, he had never even talked to her about the working with agents disclosure. He had never had a buyer agency agreement signed by her. So he was just kind of doing it really sloppily. My friend said to her, well, you should call my friend Neil. He's helping me and he won't forget his lockbox key. I'm like, okay, thanks, buddy. That was nice of you. And she did. She called me, said, oh, I got this agent, but I'm not working with him anymore. He's terrible and I don't want to do this anymore. Then I found out the guy was in my same firm, not my same office, but my same firm. And I'm like, that could get a little sticky. I didn't know the guy. So I talked to my manager and I said, what should I do about this? Can I even work with her? And the manager said, well, if he doesn't have a buyer agency agreement or even a working with agents form signed and she wants to fire him, and she specifically said, the girl, the client said, if your manager won't let you work with me, then I'm going to your competitor because I'm just over it. I promise you. The only reason I'm giving your company another try is because your friend vouched for you. And for some reason, she decided to give me a shot. Well, my manager said, okay, fine, go for it. And I did everything. I did not shortcut it. There was nothing that he did that helped me at all. We started from scratch. It was a month. Every weekend, a few times a week, showing her stuff, went all over the city. Showed her mom some stuff along with her. But wouldn't you know it, as luck would have it, Murphy's Law, the one she ended up wanting to make an offer on was one of the 3 that he showed her. And we did. And it went through. And we closed. And 3 days later, my manager called me in the office and said, oh, his broker in charge is saying that he's the procuring cause. He wants to get the entire commission. He says he earned it. And I had objection with that theory. And I'm like, interesting, no. And I left. A little bit later, my broker called me again, the manager, and she said, okay, he's willing to go down to 50%. If you'll split it 50%, he'll let it go. And I'm like, no buyer agency agreement. She wanted to fire him. She was going to a different firm. If it weren't for me, then I did everything just because we ended up buying. He was, of course, claiming procuring cause. And I said no again. And he came back and said, okay, 35%. And at this point, my manager said, well, Neil, sometimes you should just put things under the, sweep them under the rug, put them to rest, move on with life. Maybe you should just pay him. And I'm like, okay, thanks, manager. That's really supportive of you. And I said, okay, let me think about it. No. I said it nicer than that. Came back with 30%. This happened like 3 times in a row. She asked me to give in. Finally, I did. And I said, okay, I'm tired of you pressuring me. I'm tired of this whole thing. Can I just move on with life? I'll give him 20%. He said, nope, 30. And I said, okay, 25. He said, nope, 28. And I'm like, I'm done. I tried. What comes next? And she said, well, we could go to the realtor board and do an arbitration, but that would be airing our dirty laundry since we're in the same company. Would you agree? If you both agree, could we just have 3 managers that don't know either one of you do like a little board of arbitration and you present your case and let them decide? And I felt pretty good. And that's what we did. And long story short, I won. I had to give him nothing. Maybe he should have taken the 20. But what ended up happening was my manager did not back me up. 3 times in a row, she tried to get me to pay. And 3 other managers thought I shouldn't pay. So guess what? Within about 2 months, I found another firm. That was the reason I left that firm. Because they claimed procuring cause of sale. But the problem was there was a break in continuity. He did originate a series of events, but they broke. In fact, he didn't do it right because the paperwork is what really got him. And when that arbitration happened, she had become my friend. So she kind of was extra willing to help me. So she very kindly wrote a letter that I was able to present to the arbitrator saying, yeah, I wouldn't have used this company if it weren't for Neil. That didn't hurt, right? Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Sure. And you didn't even have agency documentation to even work with, right? So that wasn't even an option. Yeah, it can get messy. So that's the idea of procuring cause. He thought he had it. He really didn't. His broker manager should have probably helped him. They should have probably talked to an attorney and said, "Do we even have this?" Because you're right. I had this, and that's what really ticked me off the most. I was initially ticked that I was questioned. Secondly, because now I got to put time into defending myself, and it was dozens of hours, at least. Well, maybe 1 dozen, maybe 12 to 15 hours. I had to get all my little ducks in a row and paperwork. And part of what I did some math. And I said, well, by the time I closed this, what I earned gave me, I think it came out to being on like $150 an hour. You're asking me to give up blah, blah, blah. And I've spent all these hours on this. So it's costing me this. And I spelled it all out in this math. And I gave it to him and his broker and my broker and the three decision makers. And that probably helped a little bit too. But that's it. Series of events originated without a break, resulting in procuring a ready, willing, and able buyer is procuring cause. So just be applying these three elements to whatever narrative issue they present for you in the test question, so that you can tell, was this procuring cause? Was it and they'll be pretty clear cut about it. Did they originate the chain of events? Was there a break in the continuity? No. Did it result in a ready, willing, and able buyer? Then they were the procuring cause. Don't forget, if you don't pay the $45, your license goes expired. If you don't do the education by June 10th, the CE continuing ed, it becomes inactive. And if either of those is the case, then you don't have a license with which to do real estate for other people for money. So you got to not do any real estate. Got to stop. So if the test question says, what do you do if your license expires? What comes next? Tell me in the chat. What comes next if your license expires? What does the broker need to do if the license expires? Everybody's like, oh, what's the trick? What is he doing? This jerk. He keeps doing these things. There it is, Ashley. That's the first step. Stop doing real estate. There's the testable question. What's the next step if your license goes inactive or goes expired? Stop doing real estate. Yes, fix it after that, but make sure you don't do any real estate in the meantime, right? You pick that up? Licenses have to be on active status at the time the commission was earned. The license must be on active status when you actually officially earn the commission. You could get paid if you go inactive as long as the stuff you did was while it was active. And then you went inactive in the meantime, you could still get paid. But it had to have been on active status when that commission was earned. Oh, yeah. So when you have to reinstate things, you need to use a form to reinstate. You've done the stuff to reinstate yourself or to get reinstated. Now you have to tell the commission that you want to be reinstated. There's a form for that. So you got to pay if that's what you didn't do. You got to do the education if that's what fell through. And you got to send in a form telling them that you fixed it, having proof that you fixed it, and say, yep, please reactivate me. Take a look at something here. Okay, good. Let's do this. Let's do this poll. It's only 5 questions. Take a look. I'll give you some privacy or some quiet at least, and go through these 5 questions. Okay, let's share this poll. See how we did. To be legal and enforceable, an agency agreement must be, well, hopefully in that moment when you read that, you thought to yourself, let's look for the word in writing, because all agency agreements must be in writing. Okay, that weeds out one of them. Now we're down to three, but between whom? In writing between the client and the principal. Well, that's the same person. Client is the principal, right? That's not it. In writing between the agent and the principal. The agent is the firm and the principal is the client. That looks pretty good. And most of you got it. In writing between the agent and the firm. Well, no, that's not it, because that would be between the firm and the firm, right? And if you're talking about agent as the human, still wrong. So it's C. It's the third one. Between the agent and the client or the principal. It needs to be in writing. Required elements of an agency agreement include what? Real estate license number of firm. That's tempting. We did see that on the last page of the listing agreement, but let's keep reading. Real estate license number of broker. Not the driver's license at all. The best answer here is the license number of the broker. It's the broker's signature that's required. It's also the broker's license number. We did see that it's the firm's license number, so I think the PSI question would not be like this. It'd be a little more specific, but the best answer is that they're probably going to be looking for is the broker themselves, the human, need to have their license number in case they misbehave, basically, so you can track them down, figure out who they are. All agency agreements must expire. They all must have an expiration. In the case of a property management agreement, it has the option to renew. It expires, but it automatically renews. It still has an expiration. They all have to expire. A required element of an agency agreement allows what? All of these are versions of discrimination. Let's see. Client and firm to decide what type of buyer will purchase the home. Sometimes they try that. Sometimes that seller says, Neil, I don't want just anybody to buy it. And you're like, oh no, here we go. No form of discrimination ever, best choice. No special exceptions allowed. No discrimination unless agreed in writing. No. No discrimination, period. Why do we need a written agency agreement? To get paid, for sure, certainly. Rules of engagement between principal, who is the client, and the firm. Well, yes, there are those in there. Sure. So those are two pretty good answers. But the third one, the agency agreement does not have rules of engagement between the parties or the principals or the seller and buyer. So that is what keeps all of the above from being true. The first two answers are pretty good, both of them. But because the third option is not okay, then that means the fourth option can't be true. Best answer, to get paid. Best answer. It keeps the agent, gives them something in writing to prove that they did what they're supposed to do to get paid, and the seller promised to do so. Good job. Okay, let's talk about working with sellers. Real Estate Commission says, let's do some pre-listing activities. Let's ask the seller when we go to meet them, we talk to them up front, hey, I'm going to be there at 6 o'clock tonight. Please make sure, if possible, that you have a copy of your deed, although that's not like vital. It just would be nice. It's useful. You could also, by the way, look it up. So probably you're going to look it up just to see if maybe there's multiple names on it. If there's multiple names on the deed, spouses, and then one of them is there when you get there, you might have an issue. Maybe the other one is working, and that's okay, but you're not ready to list a house that night. You're going to have to wait until you get the other one's signature too. Because maybe by seeing on the deed that there was another one, right? It might also give you a heads up to ask, what's the deal with this other person on the deed? Oh, no, I bought them out. Okay, do you have proof? Do you have documentation? Oh, well, now let's figure that out. Because you don't have a listing unless all the legal sellers sign. That's what this is about. Copy of a survey, if available. It's not always available. They may not have had one done. But if they do have one, that'd be useful. Because you can kind of see Maybe is there any indication of an encroachment? That great 3-car garage that they want you to brag about that they built themselves, but they accidentally built it a foot over the property line, and then they had a survey. Maybe the survey they showed you is the one before the garage, and your question is, I'm no surveyor, and I'm not trying to interpret this for you, but from what I can tell, looks like that garage is really close to the line. It might even if it's within the boundaries of the property, it might be violating the setback allowance. It's not okay. It's not only required that you are within the property line. It could also be a requirement that there's a pretty significant setback line that you have to build something no closer than 10 feet to the line, or 20 or 40. My brother-in-law's house that I sold for him a couple of years ago, the back line was like a 40-foot setback. The front line was like a 60-foot setback. It was a great couple of acre lot, but he had to be right smack in the middle of it. He had to put the house there. He had big setback lines, the purpose being to make sure houses had lots of space in between them. That was whatever the deed restriction was from the original person who sold the land. Copy of the covenants and restrictions. This is important, because let's make sure we can tell the buyer what they're allowed to do with this place as per the HOA rules and the covenants and restrictions. By the way, HOA documents are not necessarily the same thing as covenants and restrictions. Another thing that you could see covenants and restrictions referred to as are CC and Rs in the chat. CC and Rs, conditions, covenants, and restrictions. A neighborhood could have no HOA, no homeowners association, but still have covenants and restrictions. That's all the time. It's done all the time. Let's get them. Let's get the rules for the HOA there at the bottom. Verify the dues and assessments. And oh, by the way, too, some HOAs are run poorly. Anybody ever heard of that? An HOA ran their finances bad and they're like in a hole. Maybe there's even a judgment against them or some sort of a lawsuit. Maybe they've got special assessments that they're levying against all the properties, like a townhouse community. Oops, we forgot to set aside money for new roofing, and all the roofs are going bad at the same time. So now we've put a special assessment on everybody. We already are charging you $200 a month for HOA dues for the whole neighborhood. And this is a little pocket of townhomes within the whole neighborhood. So that's another $200 HOA or TOA, Townhome Owners Association. And then there's another $250 special assessment for the roof because we didn't collect enough over time. And that real world example, I had a listing just like that. And at the time, all the other competition, all the other competing townhouses did not have that extra $250 per month required. And it was a pending one, so it was going to be something that would probably be applicable to the new buyer. If it were a confirmed special assessment already in place, then the seller would have had to figure it out and pay for it. But because it was pending, not yet approved, but probably going to happen, I had to tell all these buyers, look, you're going to be paying like $650 a month, where the other competitor down the street at that other neighborhood, about $400 a month for HOA. Do you want to put roofs on everybody's places? And we sat. Nobody wanted to do that. How do we get these documents? Best way to get these things, well, first try is ask the seller. You could certainly get the deed yourself. Surveys are not often recorded, so this may not be something you have access to. You could probably get the covenants and restrictions and the HOA documents yourself, but those tend to be harder to round up, especially HOA stuff, because the HOA, they are creative when it comes to charging people fees. It's always the path of least resistance to just, please, let's get the seller to do it. They'll give the seller the documents easier than they'll give you or anybody else. They might even charge you for them, but they won't charge the seller for them because the seller is an owner in the neighborhood. The best practice, see if the seller could round them up. There is a section in the MLS for covenants and restrictions, but you're at the mercy of whoever put them in. And is it the most recent version? So I don't ever rely on that. I try to get the most recent version and get the seller to help me out that way. That's what we're getting from the seller. or on our own in the case of the deed. What are we going to give to the seller? That working with agents disclosure so that we can talk about it. And then there's two other disclosures that are pretty much always needed. There are a couple of exemptions here, but mineral, oil, and gas rights disclosure. Remember our subsurface rights from week 1? You have surface rights, the ability to use the property on the surface. You have air rights, the ability to build up and go upward. And then you have subsurface rights, drill down. There was a builder. D.R. Horton, I believe it was the builder. And once upon a time in North Carolina, on page 837 of their contract, just kidding, but it is a long contract, they had in fine print, we reserve the right to allow people to actually sell the subsurface rights under your new house that we're going to build for you. People could have drilled under the neighborhood, like way down, but still. And people eventually noticed that, and people eventually had a problem with that. And D.R. Horton said, okay, we won't do that anymore. So they don't. But that's what we're talking about. That, I think, things like that, not necessarily with them, but that sort of thing started popping up, so it became a required disclosure. We haven't had this MOG, mineral, oil, and gas rights disclosure, the entire time I've been in the business. It's only been the last few years. But now it's a requirement. Need to find out from the seller 3 things. Do you know if the previous owner sold the rights to someone else to drill or mine for minerals, oil, or gas? And they may not know that because it was a previous owner. So on that one, they have the option to check, yes, I know it, no, I don't know, or no representation. I'm not telling because I really just don't know. Right? I'm sorry. Yes, they have sold the rights. No, they have not sold the rights, or no representation, meaning I don't know if they have or not. But then the next 2 questions on this disclosure are about that current owner. The one of them says, have I sold the mineral, oil, or gas rights? Yes, no. There's no representation available. They have to say yes or no. And then the other one is, do I plan to? Do I, the owner, seller, plan to sell the mineral, oil, or gas rights? Yes or no. Again, no representation is not an option there. So that's what the mineral, oil, and gas rights disclosure is about. And then there's the RPODs, or residential property disclosure form, and we'll look at that one together. That's about, is there a problem with the plumbing or the electrical or the foundation settling or anything about the property, including tell me about the HOA, if there is one. Do they charge a fee? Yes. You got it. Both of them. Yeah. Yep. The disclosures they have to fill out themselves, but this RPODs specifically, says so right there on the front. Seller not allowed to fill, or agent not allowed to do it. You got it. It's 4 pages. The first page is just signatures. The second and third pages are pretty much about the property, and the bottom half of the third and all of the fourth is about the HOA. And some of the HOA disclosures are like this. Do you charge the new buyer a fee for like a welcome to the neighborhood? Give us $500 to set up your account fee. That's a thing. Sometimes they charge the seller for leaving and the buyer for coming. And it's good to know this early so people don't get this nasty surprise. We provide those things, but then guide them and answer their questions as they fill out those disclosures. So obviously we're in this pre-listing meeting. We're going to talk with that seller about who represents who. Right now, Mr. Seller, you haven't hired me yet. We haven't decided to work together yet. So don't tell me anything you wouldn't want a buyer to know, because I do a lot of business, and it could be that you hire a different broker and list with them because you told me you're going to interview 2 or 3 brokers. If you don't choose to hire me, but I end up bringing the buyer for your house, just make sure that you don't tell me something that could affect your negotiating position, because I would be required to tell that buyer that I brought for your house. I like explaining that to them. It makes them think a couple of things. First of all, wait, he said if we decide to work together, you mean he doesn't absolutely want my listing? No, I don't know yet. Let me see what we're dealing with here. Property and person. Are you a jerk? I don't work with jerks if I can help it. I'm not going to say that, but that's what I'm thinking. And then also, what was it? What was the other thing? Property, and then I just blanked. It just went away. Totally gone. I'll think of it in like 10 seconds though. We're discussing how agency works. That's right. It also shows to them that you're the ethical agent that tells them not to share secrets with you, because you might end up working on the other side. Also, that you might actually already have the buyer or be such a good agent that you're bringing the buyer. It just puts you in a good position to say it sort of like that. Also, odds are those other 3 brokers they might be talking to did not warn them of this. And I think it says a lot for your ethics to warn them of something that they didn't get warned about by the others, right? Oh, look how ethical and honest this person is. That's who I want to go with. So basically you're saying, you haven't hired me yet. We haven't decided to work together yet. So don't tell me anything you don't want anyone else to know, right? We're going to have a tour of the property. That's a good opportunity to kind of win them over too. It's also a good opportunity to figure out what's wrong with it and get their take on things. If you're walking through the upstairs hallway and you see a leak or stain on the ceiling, and they're guiding you and they're just walking and talking, and you stop and you're looking and they look back wondering why you're not with them. That? Well, you see, before we put the new roof on, it leaked, and so we just haven't painted over it. But the leak is gone. There is no leak anymore because we have a new roof. Do you think we should paint it? And now you've kind of let them do the heavy lifting. Yeah, I think you probably should, because it just caught my attention and it's going to catch the buyer's attention, and buyers tend to horribilize things that they find. So let's take that off the table. And if it's not really a leak, get that thing painted. Let's put yourself in the best possible light, right? Oh, by the way, do you have proof that it was fixed? Oh, you have the receipt? Do you have the invoice to the roofing company that you had a roof? That's good. That's nice to have, so that we can not just go on your word. Some of these things you're thinking, not saying, but you are asking for oh, great. If I could just get a copy of that invoice that you paid to the roofer. Oh, well, it was my friend. Oh boy, here we go. Was it really re-roofed? Oh no. Well, see, what I meant, when I said it was re-roofed, I meant they re-roofed 3 pieces of shingle. Okay. That's different. The questions and the silences help you figure things out. So tour the property, you're looking for red flags so that you can figure out what material facts you might need to disclose. You're certainly asking them things like, hey, point things out to me as if I were the buyer for your house. What did you like about your house? You're looking for things to brag about, things to put in the advertising. And then the big discussion at the bottom, that last one, and then we'll have our break. Fixtures versus personal property. We'll talk more about that when we flags. We're having the conversation about fixtures and personal property, because inevitably they want to keep something that's screwed in, nailed down, tied to it, that is a fixture. And so you have to have that conversation. Okay, you want the chandelier that's in the dining room. Well, then let's go ahead and get you to take it down and replace it now, so that what that buyer sees is what that buyer gets. Because inevitably what they see, they're going to want, as ugly as it may be. So have that conversation about fixtures and personal property. Oh, what are you willing to leave behind? It's got a pool, so the pool furniture that's like in really bad shape, you just don't really want it to move it. The things like, then it gets into what's in the contract, what's in the listing agreement. And there's a bullet point list that says what is a fixture. So yes, IRMA still matters. Remember the acronym IRMA, figuring out what a definition of a fixture is. But in real life, what really matters is what makes it into the contract. Because if you'll notice, we look in the offer to purchase here, we scroll on down for a bit. There's a double list of bullet point items. Put that in your mind. Take a little mental photograph and let's go over to the listing agreement And scroll on down. Oh, look at that. Same exact list. In real life, the realtor form that we use has a list of fixtures, things that are considered fixtures because we say so. And if you don't like it, change it. If the parties to the contract don't like this, want to keep something that's listed as a fixture, then tell everybody. It's not law. It's just that here are the things that cause the most problems historically. Therefore, here's how we're going to handle it unless you tell us to do so differently. So yes, IRMA is still important for your purposes to pass the PSI, but in real life, here's what the fixture list looks like. Some key points here that you will not be tested on but are different. Storage sheds and utility buildings. That seems a little unclear. Have you seen some utility buildings in Lowe's that are basically the size of something you could put on your shoulder and walk out the door with because it's made of plastic by Rubbermaid? Looks like a storage building to me. Only big enough for maybe one person to get in there and throw a couple of chairs and a weed eater. Well, it doesn't go into all those details. It just says storage sheds and utility buildings and that they are fixtures. So by default, if it's a storage shed or utility building, no matter how big or by whom it's made or how it's attached, if it's attached. It doesn't say if it's screwed to the ground, if it's on footings. It just says buildings and sheds. Then that means it's a fixture. And if your client says, I just spent $2,000 on that plastic shed, I'm keeping it, I'm taking it. Okay, then let's tell everybody this is not included. That's the point to this whole thing. Go down here to the next section and say, items do not convey include storage building that they just bought, right? Just be clear. Other interesting ones to me are brackets for TVs, but not the TVs. We had trouble with that back in the day when the TV started being hung on the walls. People started thinking that's a fixture. It's screwed into the wall. You can't just lift that off. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But sometimes you have to unscrew something to pull that TV off of that bracket. Well, all of that is eliminated. Now it's official. It says in the fixture list, the bracket is a fixture. The TV is not. No matter if it's screwed in like a little screw to kind of keep it from falling off the bracket or not. And oh, by the way, don't forget the bracket's in two pieces. One is attached to the TV and one's attached to the wall. Don't let them leave with half the bracket going on the moving truck because it's still attached to the TV. Those are little in the wild life lessons you learn. But again, you won't be tested on these rules. I'm just showing you in real life, there's some nuances. Here's another one. It's hiding from me. There it is. All stoves, ranges, and ovens. And I can't help but think of grandma's house with the kitchen, little mill house, right? Little open air kitchen. It might even have a washer and dryer in the kitchen, but it certainly has the white coil top range with stains on it, hanging out beside the table. Looks like it's practically out in the middle of the floor, plugged in. Basically looks exactly like the refrigerator is, hanging out practically in the middle of the floor, plugged in. And you can do the same thing with both. You can unplug them and push them out the door. But the refrigerator, according to this list, is personal property. It's not in this list of fixtures, but the range is. The range, no matter how unattached it may be or how unattached it may be, is still considered a fixture in real life with this contract, with this document. But again, I just paid $1,000 for that oven, that range. I'm taking it with me, says the seller. Okay, fine. Then let's tell everybody. And if you're going to entertain an offer from an FHA buyer, guess what? The FHA appraiser requires there be a working range in the house. So let's go ahead and replace the one you want to take with you. Because unless you don't want to entertain offers from FHA buyers using FHA financing, you're going to have an issue. That's a whole other thing we can get into. But the point is the clarity, just making sure everybody is on the same page. Here we go. Obviously, when you're in this meeting, you can talk to them about what you charge. They're going to ask you. And so you could, since it's a pre-listing meeting and you might be wanting to come back to talk to them later, because you don't yet know what it's worth. You just got there to figure out what you're dealing with, and then you're going to go home, go to the office, do some math, and maybe come back tomorrow, do an analysis, figure it out tomorrow. Maybe you don't want to tell them what you're going to charge them yet, but you could certainly discuss the plans, and you might even have like a fee structure. Some agents do like a tier system. I'll charge you 4% if this is what I do, sort of like that a la carte limited service thing, except maybe not so limited. It's not like limited service, but you do have tiers. You could do like 40 pictures, measuring, advertising. Of course, the sign and the lockbox is at 4.5%, but at 5.5%, I'll also do drone photography and 60 photos, including the website and special pay, blah, blah, blah. There's all kinds of marketing efforts you can, is this thing getting weird? Okay, let me change this. I'm sure that's annoying. There we go. You could do that. And that's when you would talk about it. Talk about your marketing plans, what you do to set yourself apart. Now, in the last couple of years, agents didn't have to do much, frankly. Now, they might have promised to do much, but they really just had to have a pulse and put a sign in the yard, and then a million people would be fighting over the house to pay over asking price. And then the agent would brag about what a great job they did, and my brain would hurt because of my eyes rolling in the back of my head thinking, really? The dog could have probably done about the same. And I'm just saying that for everybody. It was pretty easy to be a listing agent. The hard part was getting the listing, fighting your way amongst the other agents to get the listing. But once you had it, pretty much just putting it up there is what it took. Just get it out there, tell everybody that it's available. But here's when you're going to talk about all that good stuff. Oh, yeah, that's good. Ooh-wee. Wow. Nightmare scenario, Doug. Doug points out a great thing here. The conversation is important. What goes and stays. And more importantly is follow up that verbal conversation with the written version, the email follow-up. Hey, based on our conversation, I just want to recap. Bullet points. You're taking the curtain rods, the alarm system, the light fixtures, correct? Okay. Let's not have it out there so I told you. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. But then in the meantime, you, the listing agent, didn't tell everybody, the potential buyers, that those were not staying with the house. And then, as is often the case, when disputes come up, as he ran into, guess what pocket it comes out of? Yep. And not saying he did anything wrong, but if you do something wrong, to the point where somebody might want to complain to the commission, you absolutely are coming out of pocket hoping that they don't complain to the commission. So sometimes it's just because you want to make it smooth. Other times it's because you want to hopefully make them forget that they can go to the commission website and click the complaint button. And now you're paying the money and having to deal with the disciplinary action. I don't think what he did in there was anything like that. I'm not saying that. But sometimes it's part of it. Like when the person I knew the agent, when they helped him buy it, didn't tell him to have a septic inspection. And then a year later, when the client got divorced, the same agent was their listing agent. Then the buyer that came around to buy it did the septic inspection. That's when they found out that the leach field was destroyed. Now, apparently it worked fine, but officially it was acknowledged to have been crushed, and it had $5,000 required to make it right. And guess who paid that? The listing agent who sold it to him a year earlier, because back then when they bought it with him, he didn't tell him to have a septic inspection, or they claim he didn't. He might have, but at least he didn't have it in writing that they declined it. And so he had to make a decision, I'm sure. I'm guessing at this point. He probably talked to his BIC, talked to his broker in charge, talked to the maybe attorney, said, hey, what do you think I should do here? Should I pony up this $5,000? And they all told him, well, you can either pay the $5,000 or you can sit back and wait for them to complain to the real estate commission, because you should have warned them and had advised the septic inspection, and then end up paying the $5,000 on top of that. He paid the $5,000. I don't know if he got complained about. I've never seen it in the bulletin, but those are the decisions we have to deal with sometimes, right? Reminder, Sherman Antitrust Act says the compensation is always negotiable. We cannot set standard commissions as an industry, although you, an individual, and the firm can. The firm commission rate that we do here at this firm, ABC Realty, is 7% because we're worth it. Or I work for XYZ brokerage, but I'm special. I'm the best one in there. I charge 8%, 6.5%, whatever it is. Whether you negotiate or not, this is what I charge. That is allowed. Okay. The commission going to the buyer's agent. Don't forget, one second, sorry. Get a little juice on this iPad so I can go over some stuff in a minute. That seller is agreeing to pay you a commission rate. Let's just say it's 5%. And you decide, you and your firm say, let's entice other brokers that are also subscribed to the MLS to bring buyers for this listing, and we'll do so by offering to pay them half of this 5%. We'll give them 2.5% if they bring a buyer, and it turns into a closing. Does not have to be an equal split, by the way. It could be that you want to keep 3% and give them 2 instead of 2.5. Doesn't have to be a 50-50 split. All of that is negotiable, even down to the split between your firm and the firm bringing the buyer. Whatever the buyer agent commission is needs to be told in the MLS. And it's reported. It really is. And let me see. I actually have the MLS pulled up right here. There you go. If you scroll down, this is just a random listing in Concord for $419,000. And if you scroll on down to the bottom of this listing, oh, look. Buyer agency, meaning if that buyer comes along and has an agent helping them who has been hired and is officially their buyer agent, then the seller is going to pay that firm 2.5% commission. And then if you keep on looking, there's sub-agency. That means if that buyer comes along and an agent who is helping that buyer is not officially their buyer's agent, which means they don't have a buyer agency agreement signed with them, that agent is making nothing. In other words, this seller does not want to sell their house to a buyer who is unrepresented, to a buyer who is not represented by their own buyer agent. They're not interested in any sort of seller sub-agency arrangement. It goes back to that liability thing. They don't want the extra liability on their shoulders or their listing agent's shoulders. So they're discouraging it by not paying them. Now, if we kept on scrolling through, I'm just winging this right now. Let's see how long it takes us to find one. There's a 3 and a 0. There's a 3 and a 0. There's a 3 and a 0. Oh, 2.5 and a 0. Okay, I tried 5 and I still haven't found one. There's a 2% to the buyer agent and a 0. I'll try one more. And still nothing. All of those sellers, none of them are willing to pay an agent who is a sub-agent to the seller, but not a buyer agent. And that's pretty much the commonplace thing that you're seeing out there. It's a pretty vast minority of listings that are paying even if you're a sub-agent, but it's negotiable. So the compensation is located in the buyer agency agreement. Now, that buyer agent who has been hired by this buyer, they say to that buyer, look, the odds are I'm going to get my money from the listing side. That seller is paying their listing agent is sharing with me. But what about that last one we just saw that was 2% to the buyer agent? You saw that it was less than some of the other ones at 2.5 and 3. Maybe a buyer agent says to their buyer, now, there are some sellers out there only paying 2, and I don't work as a buyer agent for people for anything less than 2.5. It's my personal business decision. And so, Mr. Buyer, if you end up buying a house from a seller who's only paying me 2%, I'm going to ask you for that other half. That's how the buyer agency agreement is written. People don't talk about it. They don't really think about it. Everybody, in fact, some people very incorrectly say to the buyer, look, don't worry about paying me. It's free to you. I get paid from the seller. That's the wrong way to say it. because it's not the truth. Yes, you're probably going to get paid from the seller's proceeds. However, are you going to be happy with whatever that seller's offering? Because sometimes it's 2 and you really would rather it be 3. How bad do you want it? That might be a big enough deal to that buyer agent to say, no, oh, what? 2? No way. I'm not doing that. And sometimes you see 1.5. Some builders are offering 1. A certain one that you would all know currently pays 1% to the buyer agent. It's allowed. But what if you've shown 45 regular resale houses and then they end up buying one of those builders' houses and you're like, I was kind of counting on 2 or 3 and now I'm getting 1. Well, in the buyer agency agreement that you had signed, you should have explained to them, look, guys, if I make less than what I charge from the seller that you're deciding to buy from, then I'm going to look to you for the difference. That makes sense? That's a hard conversation. Nobody wants to have that conversation because there's a lot of us to pick from, and that buyer might say, what? That's crazy. Everybody knows the seller pays your... well, if that's the way you do things, then I'm going to go find one that appreciates me more. That's a possibility, right? BA buyer agent compensation is in the agreement. It says, here's what I work for, and I'm hoping to get all that from the seller, but if I don't, you're going to pay me the difference. You could also, by the way, as any kind of agents, buyer's agent or listing agent, but we're talking about buyer at the moment, you could charge them extra fees too, if they'll agree, if you can get away with it, if you can prove you're worth it. That's really what it comes down to. It's those agents that have such a reputation, such a sought after agent because they're such a big deal. Maybe they've got billboards and everybody, oh, it's her. Wow, you're lucky. She only works with so many clients. She's like really high in demand. Oh, but she also charges a retainer fee. You got to pay $500 to start working with her, sort of like an attorney, charging a retainer fee. Now, I don't see that very much. I don't hear of that happening from agents and CEs and stuff very much. I do ask. But, if you're in enough demand, if people appreciate what you offer and see it as its own special, I was trying to think of that quote from the Liam Neeson movie, special skills and abilities. If you have a list of special skills and abilities, then maybe you could justify charging a retainer fee. And then the success fee is what you get upon closing, right? You did what you're supposed to do, and now you get paid at closing for the stuff that you agreed to do. The splits. Co-brokerage versus in-house. So when it's competing firms cooperating in the sale, that compensation, as we saw a moment ago at the bottom of the MLS sheet, is spelled out. Here's what a co-broke arrangement is going to produce. Here's what you're going to make, buyer agent, if you bring your buyer for our listing here at this other company that we're at. 2 different firms. The co-brokerage split is this. An in-house sale is obviously under the same roof in the same firm. The splitting of the fees would be handled in the policy and procedures manual. So you've got, yes, the MLS split, even if it's in the same firm, is going to be the same. If you're a buyer agent making 2% on bringing the buyer for this house, if that happens to be a listing in your own firm, you're probably still making the 2%, right? But there's also the split between you and your firm, and that is what is in the policy and procedures manual. What are you getting with your firm? When I started, I worked for Allen Tate Company, a big independent, and they're still big, but they got bought out, but they still operate under that name. And at the time, I have no idea how they do it now. At the time, they offered new agents a 50% split. You bring the money back to the firm, turn in your paperwork, turn in the check's made out to Allen Tate Company. They give you half of what that check was written for, 50%. And then they had this like floating 12-month thing. So over the course of the most recent 12 months, if you sold, once you got to like 18,000 earned commission, another 2,000 that you earn is going to bump your split from 50% up to 52 and blah, blah, blah. Then it stops at like 75 or 80 or something. Then there's firms that say it's just 80-20 off the top, period. Whatever you bring in, we take 20 off the top, give you 80. And then there's other firms like a Remax who might even give you 100% of the split, but you're going to have a significant monthly fee that you have to pay even if you don't sell anything. And there for a while, I worked for a Remax where I had a 95% split. I got to keep 95% of those checks that I brought in. But I had to pay $1,100 a month for walking through their door and putting a balloon by my name on the business card. And yeah, at the time, to me, it was worth it because of the brand name recognition. People respect the name. I didn't have a name established yet, so I bought it, basically, and paid. But then 2008 hit, and I had 4 deals that fell through in 1 month, October 2018, and I'm like, this $1,100 a month is kind of painful right now. I'm out of here, and I went somewhere that didn't have such a high desk fee but had a smaller split in exchange. So you've got the split between the firms, and then you've got the split once one of those sides takes the check back to their office and splits with the firm between the broker and their own firm. Listing agreements. Let's look at this pop quiz. Broker Betty is on a listing appointment with seller Sam. Sam tells Betty that the roof has leaked in the past and that Sam had it repaired. At the open house, a buyer, Patty, asks about structural issues with the home. Broker Betty says there's no issues. And that's all she says. What might she be found guilty of? So what'd she do? She said there's no issues. Okay. Now that's really tricky because sometimes it's like, well, she said there's no issues. You might confuse that with omission, right? It's not that she didn't say anything. It's that she said there was no issues. Those are not the same thing. So don't confuse omission with saying there's nothing wrong with it. If she had just said nothing at all, that would be omission. But in this case, she said something. So therefore it was misrepresentation. Now, what kind of misrepresentation? Well, she didn't bring up the point that she knew it had leaked in the past. She had no proof. There's no mention of any invoices or proof that the leaks were repaired. So she had nothing. So she'd be found guilty of negligent misrepresentation. We talked about this in the start, but let's recap because not everybody was here. And this goes back to Twee's question in the Notion. So an open listing agreement, and Margie confirmed this for us. In England, they do it this way. See the yard in front of that picture there? There's like 8 signs there. That seller can list with multiple firms and whichever firm actually ends up bringing the buyer is the one who gets paid. And all those other 7 aren't getting anything. And also, if the owner themselves finds a buyer, no brokers are getting paid either. This is the worst one for a broker, clearly, right? We don't want to do this. And we don't. We don't do this here. It's not the way it's done. It's just a thing that could happen. So this would show up on the national portion of the exam because of that, right? It's a thing that exists in the world somewhere, but not here. The next kind is a little better. Still not great, but a little better than an open agreement. It says that I'm going to list your house for you, and you're only going to list with me. And if I bring the buyer myself, because maybe they called on my advertising or my sign, you're going to pay me. And if another broker in the MLS with which I am cooperating brings the buyer, you're going to pay me, and I'm going to share that with them. But if you, the seller, who work an hour away, and there's no way I could ever meet your coworkers, and it was never even possible for them to find out about your house through me, you go to work, you take the flyer, post it on the bulletin board, they see it, they have interest, then they end up buying it. I'm out because you found them. You, the seller, don't have to pay me a commission because I did not procure that buyer for you. That's an exclusive agency. Think of it like this. Agency means an agent brought the buyer, whether you or the other agent, and therefore agents get paid. In exclusive agency, agents are getting paid, but if the seller finds the buyer themselves, agents are not getting paid. And then the best one, and the one that we do here, exclusive right to sell. Exclusive right to sell. In fact, look right here. It's top of the page. of the listing agreement I showed you. Exclusive right to sell listing agreement, right there. That's how we do it. That says, if the broker who listed it for you, me, I'm your listing agent, if I bring the buyer because they met me at the gym or called me on the sign and through me, I brought the buyer for you, I'm getting paid. Maybe the entire full total commission, whatever it is. Or if a cooperating broker through the MLS finds out about it and brings the buyer, I'm going to get paid by you. You're going to pay me the full amount that you agreed to pay me, and then I'm going to share that with them. Even if you go to work, put the flyer on the bulletin board, find that buyer, no matter if there was no chance I would have ever found that particular buyer, and that's who ends up buying it, I still get paid. Right? That's the best one for the broker. And sometimes people say, well, that's not fair. The seller found them themselves. Well, okay. The thing is, and I explained it in the little thing I wrote on Notion, we do a lot of upfront work and expense in a listing. We've paid for professional photos many times, drone photos, the time spent creating advertising. We might even pay somebody to run ads, pay Facebook for paid advertising. There's all kinds of stuff you have to do up front to throw those hooks in the water, right? You don't know where that buyer's going to come from yet. So which thing do you choose not to do? What if the seller says, well, why do you do all this stuff? Can't you just put a sign in the yard? Well, yeah, but the buyers can also come from social media, from the MLS. From which one do you want me to not do in exchange for paying me less than what you want to, than what I'm asking for? Sometimes they try to negotiate with you, and that's a way that you can maybe negotiate. Another thing, by the way, that I do that has pretty much eliminated them from trying to negotiate my commission is before we even get to the conversation, I'll say, by the way, right now, I have all the risk, Mrs. Seller. At the end of the day, worst case scenario, we list your property, it goes for 6 months. Maybe we got a couple of buyers along the way and they both decided to walk away and the deal fell through no fault of my own or yours. And then you ended up expiring, the listing expires. I'm out all of those dozens of hours that I put in it. You still have a house to sell, to make money on. So all the risk is on me because I don't know right now from this point early in this game if it's going to take me 20 hours to get to a paycheck or 200 hours to get to a paycheck. When you lay it out like that, not necessarily that they care, but it does make sense, right? They may not care, but they can't deny the logic of it. And I've not had much trouble. I haven't really had much bottom of the barrel lowballing by doing it that way. Because you got to justify and explain to them why they should pay you. Even if it looks like you're not earning it, it better look like you're earning it, right? And obviously that's the best one. Listing agent, exclusive to one firm, and that broker's getting paid even if the seller finds the buyer themselves. Exclusive right to sell. So here's a kind of a comparison between exclusive agency and exclusive right. Agency means it's one firm. The seller can sell it and not owe the commission. But if a broker sells it, the seller has to pay the commission. And that listing agent or they and the other cooperating co-brokerage agent split it. And then if it's an exclusive right to sell listing, it's one firm. The firm's always paid, even if the seller brings the buyer. This might be kind of helpful to have in your memory. Sometimes it's good to see those lists and charts. Hopefully you're still doing lists and charts. A protection agreement is in place, clearly to protect. And in the case of a for sale by owner, also known as an unrepresented seller, there is a disclosure that we use. We have a buyer who wants to buy a for sale by owner. We go to that for sale by owner and we say, look, got a buyer who might be interested. Would you pay me a fee? A buyer agency fee, and you explain how that works. And they might say, well, I'm trying to avoid a commission. Why would I pay you? Well, because I have a buyer right here in front of you, and you're still paying less commission than if you were to list it, because you don't have to pay a listing agent. You're just paying me to bring the buyer, and that's half, probably. So an unrepresented seller disclosure and fee agreement says, look, seller, number one, don't tell me anything, even though you're going to love me because I'm irresistible. Don't tell me anything you don't want the buyer to know. Also, you're going to pay me, and this is my fee, 2.5%, 3%, whatever it is. It protects your commission. Since you don't have a listing agreement with them, it gives you a place to have in writing so that over the next 30, 45 days, while you're facilitating this transaction, trying to get to the closing table, your time is protected. A protection agreement. It doesn't create agency with you and that seller. In fact, it specifically says there is none. Look out, beware. Don't fall in love with me, kid. Doesn't create agency between the seller and the buyer agent. Limited services agreement. That's that other word, the better term for discount broker. If you hear the word discount broker, correct them. Nope, we don't say discount broker. We call them a limited service broker, limited services broker. And they use a limited services agreement. The thing about this is they can limit their services that they're providing to their client, but their responsibilities fiduciarily are not limited. So they can limit their services, but not their responsibilities. Right? Placing the property in the MLS, give me $500 to do that. It might also say in the description of the MLS remarks section, it'll say, please contact seller directly to arrange showings, to make the showing appointment. And then also present offers directly to the seller. This is a limited service listing. Contact the seller directly with your presentation of offer. And there's a special category. It says limited service listing. Is it limited service or not? The agent's not offering anything more than that. They're saying, look, I'm not going to help you with showings. I'm not going to help you with negotiating or closing. However, if there's a problem, the agent is still responsible to help them through it. The commission does not relieve us of our responsibilities. So it can get a little tricky. Because if you're basically practically the only agent in the mix, because they've chosen a limited service broker and they've pretty much handled all the stuff, and the broker just put the sign up, put it in the MLS, and specifically said, I'm not helping you with all that other. Who is helping them? You kind of have to facilitate this thing because it benefits your buyer to get to the closing table. So you need to kind of keep the train rolling, but you're not their agent. So it can get a little awkward. And I've had that happen with a limited service listing. It was a builder/seller who hired a broker, and that broker was long story short, he got out of the business. So his broker in charge took it over as a limited service listing while it was under contract. And there were some things that happened, and the seller was getting disgruntled. He was a grumpy builder, and he said things like, oh, why are you having it inspected? Your buyer's stupid. It's a new house. There's no need for an inspection. That's just a money grab. And that's the one where I went in the attic and looked up past the water heater, and there was no insulation in half of the attic. So I took an absurd amount of pride and enjoyment in telling him very passive aggressively, oh, you know what? That house that's complete, yeah, half the roof, half the attic is uninsulated. We're going to need you to take care of that for us. All right. But limited service, at one point he got a little disgruntled, and I finally called the listing agent and I said, I know this is limited service, but don't forget, you limit your service, but not your responsibilities. I'm going to need you to step in and help your guy understand some things here because he's causing some trouble. Some things are not going as they should. So we do still have a responsibility, even in a limited service agreement. The MLS, good old multiple listing service, came about in 1960, if you'll recall. The members of the MLS are agreeing to cooperate with each other and compensate each other. So member firms are agreeing to this. It's part of the agreement. I belong to this MLS, therefore I will cooperate with the other members of the MLS. And I will put out there how much we'll pay you if you bring the buyer. That's that thing at the bottom of the page. Obviously, the advantages of an MLS is thousands of agents with potential buyers equals more buyers than any one agent can possibly have. So putting a listing out there, just putting it out for the whole world to see and giving it maximum exposure. And we saw an example of the MLS a minute ago. It's just all the details, all the facts and figures. Another advantage to it for the broker member subscriber is not just the things that are for sale, but all of these statuses too. It's nice to know what something sold for. It is also the main resource that an appraiser uses to figure out what the valuation is on the property. The appraiser uses the MLS, as do we brokers, to see, another house in that same neighborhood as my listing, within another couple hundred square feet in size, sold for $374,000. And if you look at 3 or 4 examples like that, you can kind of back into an estimate of value for the listing that you are trying to get, or in the appraiser's case, the house they're trying to appraise. And we'll talk about that in its own chapter. So that's huge. In fact, some people take this course to get licensed just so they can be able to join the MLS and have access to this data themselves directly. Although there's a lot of websites out there that kind of get pretty close, but nothing quite as comprehensive as the MLS. But you've also got the pendings, also known as under contract. What is going to sell, hopefully. It's not active, it's no longer available, but the closing date is scheduled. The thing about a pending listing is the price that it shows is still showing the listing price. Even though there's a contract out there somewhere in a file folder that says what the buyer agreed to pay and the seller agreed to take, that is not public information yet, because if that deal were to fall apart, then you would have told the whole world what the seller had been willing to take, but now they're back on the market, so there's an unfair advantage people have. So pending under contract listings do not disclose the sale price yet. The price shown is still the list price. You don't know until it closes what it's ended up selling for. The closed listings, and then also the ones that expired. There are agents who every day will set up a search for expired listings that day. And then once they get those addresses, they'll cross-check it and find the owners and use some other software and find phone numbers for those owners, and they'll call them. Oh, I noticed your listing expired today. Are you still interested in selling? I'll bet I can get it done. Let me come over and talk to you about my marketing efforts and what I can do. And sometimes they'll say, oh, wow, okay, well, no big deal. I'm going to keep it with the same person. We just lost track of the time. Or they might say, yeah, they've been terrible. Okay, come on, tell me, how can you get this done? This person has dropped the ball. Sometimes if you forget that your listing has been on the market a while and it ends up expiring and your seller has no intention of leaving you, you've made them suffer, because they're going to have a million phone calls from agents who think, ooh, this is fair game. And your seller's like, oh my gosh, the phone will not stop ringing. These vultures circling about this expired listing. And then sometimes if life changes and that seller needs to just take a break, somebody gets sick for some reason, they need to withdraw the listing. Those show up here too. Seller has just, for any reason, and the firm allows it, they can withdraw that listing. Maybe they need to take some time, take a break for some reason, and maybe they'll reactivate it later. So all of those types of categories show up. And then we saw an example of this sheet. It's square footage, because the MLS requires the square footage. Therefore, it's in there. In fact, we look at that same listing, there's a little batch of information about square feet. HLA, heated living area. The main heated living area is 2776. Is there any non-HLA, not heated area on the main? No, there's not. Is there an upper or a third level? Nope. There's a lower, though, and it's got 951 additional heated living area square feet for a total of 3727. Then the garage itself has 1150. So it spells that out. It has things like school information, tax value, deed reference. We recognize that from the first couple of weeks. Acres, all those things you need. And then some attachments. You can click on attachments and it's got things like this. The disclosure sheet. There's that RPODS, residential and property owners disclosure. The whole first page is how this thing works and the seller's signature. Then we get into the second page, which is all about the property itself. Is there any problem with the plumbing, with the heat source, here's what kind of fuel source it is. And then you notice sometimes they've written in some things. Had a new leach field put in with the septic system 4 years ago. They just wrote that in. They could have also written it over here. This is really where they should have written it. If you answered yes to any questions, identify, clarify here. They have a lot of no's. That's good. Any problems with infestation of wood-destroying insects? No. And then about halfway down on this page, it starts with the HOA information. In this case, there is no HOA, so not applicable. They can just pretty much ignore it. They still need to have everybody initial, which they skipped. And then the entire fourth page is all HOA stuff. The top one, any fees charged by the HOA in connection with conveyance or transfer. In other words, are you going to charge the new buyer, welcome to the neighborhood, give us $400? Are there any approved special assessments? Are there any judgments or pending lawsuits against the property? And then are there any judgments or lawsuits against the HOA? It gets pretty detailed. And then what do those fees cover? Management, master insurance, street lights, water, sewer. Yes, no, I don't know. No representation. So that's the RPODs that they have to fill out. And you see how small it is. It's like 10-point font. So some people, like myself, probably, well, I could see it because I'm nearsighted. I would just have to hold it an inch from my face if I didn't have glasses on. But detailed information about that property. Now, you can be a big shot and be so busy that you hire an unlicensed assistant or anybody, even a licensed assistant. And when you get a new listing, you come back to the office after having been at their house. You hand the paperwork to that assistant and say, put this in the MLS for me immediately. Please and thank you. If they screw it up, make a mistake, a transpose or a wrong square feet or whatever, you're still responsible. Even though you had someone else do it for you, you still have the liability. Therefore, maybe before they hit activate or active, make it go active, let me take a look through it. Have some things in place to be sure it's done properly, because licensees are responsible for the accuracy of what's in the MLS and the firm. Working with agents disclosure, that's another thing. Obviously, we're going to talk to that seller about. Need to make sure we find out from the client if they're going to allow dual agency. That's a part of it. If we go to the agreement itself, here's the listing agreement. Here, nope, not that one. There it is. Seller authorizes the firm to act as a dual agent, or do they not? Check yes or no, does or does not. And then a separate one for designated dual. So it gives us a place to explain both and get permission for either or both. And then seller desires exclusive representation during this agreement and does not authorize dual. That has not always been there, but I guess people had some clarity issues that probably popped up. So now we have a space to, let's be absolutely sure we're acknowledging no dual agency or designated allowed. Please initial here if that's what you want. Sometimes they start out saying no, but they end up agreeing to allow it. So you would want to get this adapted and modified accordingly. Listing agent requires the names of everybody. We talked about that. The term, meaning an expiration, is required, and a description needs to be a legal description. Let's make sure we know what we're being hired to sell so we don't accidentally sell something else. Also is going to have the price, the listing price, the brokerage fee, a protection clause. That's basically saying if this expires, this listing agreement expires, it's like a 3-month agreement. Maybe we decide on 3 months. It's negotiable, by the way. I usually do for a year, and I rarely have any pushback on that. But it's usually repeat and referral business. If it expires and they end up selling it to somebody that came as the results of my efforts while I had it listed, then I'll still get paid the commission. That's what the protection clause says. However, the caveat to that is, but if you relist with someone else, none of that matters. I'm out. It's only to keep someone from basically claiming to want to stop trying to sell. Oh, please let me out of the listing. I just want to take a break. But what they really want to do is sell it to that buyer that you brought to them last week because they got a hold of that buyer directly and they're trying to work out a deal without the commission, trying to go around your commission, which is something that can certainly happen. But if what they're doing is maybe the listing expires and they want to relist with someone else, then it doesn't matter if you brought a buyer last week and that same buyer comes along once they have a new sign in the yard with a different firm, you're out. The new firm's going to make the money. So that's the protection clause. It only is there to keep them from basically wiggling out of the agreement or letting it expire and you not getting paid on somebody that you brought through your own efforts while they had it listed with you. And then it needs to show in that listing agreement the cooperation, the fee cooperation structure with the other firm. That looks like this. And I would suggest that as sort of homework, you go through the listing agreement between now and Wednesday and identify these things and read them. Just read through the whole thing and find these points that we're talking about right now. Here we go. Cooperation to other firms. The firm has advised the seller of their policies regarding cooperation and the amounts of commission offered to other brokers. The first checkbox says whether or not you'll cooperate with subagents. You see, the second checkbox says I'll cooperate with buyer agents. So that every one of those 5 examples we looked at in the MLS that paid 0 to a subagent would not have checked this top box because they're not cooperating with subagents. And then, but let's see if they did cooperate with subagents and offer them the following compensation. If they are going to cooperate with a subagent, seller subagent instead of a buyer agent or in addition to, they'll check that box and write in for 2% or 3% or whatever it is of the gross sale price. Or they could put in a flat fee. Instead of a percentage of price, it could say, I'll give you $3,000 flat. And then the second checkbox is all about the buyer agent and what commission split that's going to be to them. And then number 3, the third box, cooperate with and compensate other cooperating firms according to the firm's attached policy. The firm will notify the seller if compensation offered to a cooperating firm is different than above. Agents with cooperating firms must orally disclose the nature of their relationship with that buyer to the firm at initial contact and confirm no later than when an offer comes in. Sellers should be careful about disclosing confidential information. So it's a way to handle things if it's maybe I've had a case before where the person called and said, could you show the property to my client and me? Because first of all, would you pay me? Because I'm not in your MLS. I'm coming from like Hendersonville, North Carolina. My client found your listing. I'm going to help them. And I'm like, really? You're going to come from Hendersonville? Are you really going to be helpful? I didn't say that, but I thought it. So he was coming out and he couldn't get in himself because he's not a member of our MLS. He didn't have a lockbox key. He had to ask me to let him in. Now, am I willing to do that? I didn't have to. I didn't have to pay him a fee because he's not in the MLS. I didn't agree to pay him a fee. I only agreed to pay me and my seller through me, cooperating brokers within the MLS that I subscribe to, which he does not subscribe to. So he needed to make the extra step, take it and say to me, would you please pay me? And I had the choice to talk to my seller and say, do you want to be aware he's coming from a whole other part of the state. Maybe they care about that. Maybe not. In that case, I usually don't. I don't care. If it gets it sold, if it's good for my seller, it's fine with me, and I'll go do a little extra work and let somebody in the house. That's the first objective, get the house sold. But that's kind of what we're talking about here. Okay. Brokerage fees. Commissions are paid as a percentage of the gross sale price, not the net to seller. Remember, we did seller net. We figured out what they're going to get once they walk away. None of that matters. What matters is the sale price. 7% of what? 6% of what? What it sells for. So if it's a sales price of $100,000, oh boy, those were the days. 5% total commission off of $100,000 is 5% of $100,000, and that is $5,000. And then if there's no other firm involved, then that's for you and your firm to split. But if there's another firm who brought the buyer, now you're going to split that $5,000 with that firm, and then take what's left back to the office and split that with your firm. But a brokerage fee could also be a flat fee, like a limited service arrangement. Hey, we do limited service. You know what? It's probably going to be the MLS that brings the buyer. That's probably why the buyer will come. So therefore, I'm not going to charge you for all the fancy photos. So I'm not going to do any of that. Pay me $500 and I'll put your listing in the MLS. Oh, by the way, if you pay me $500, that's just my side. You're still, if we put it in the MLS, we need to entice the other brokers to bring buyers. So you're going to have to pay them a fee too. But the $500 is what I'm making. I'm not getting like 3 or 4%. I'm just getting a flat 5 and doing nothing else. But you're still going to need to pay 2, 3, 4, 1, whatever the buyer agency fee needs to be. A net fee arrangement means, hey, whatever I sell this listing for, I keep over the amount you need. So if the seller wants to get $100,000, then whatever over and above the $100,000 is what the agent makes, which could be pretty good. But if you think about it, it could also allow for an unscrupulous agent to maybe falsely tell the seller that it's worth less than it really is. And therefore the commission doesn't like this one so much. Because an agent could say, oh, it's worth $100 when it's really worth a different amount, because the agent's trying to pad the amount over that they end up making, right? So a net fee means firm keeps the amount over a desired net. And then whatever's the excess is what's earned by the licensee and the firm. So what are the firm's duties in a listing? They are agreeing to advertise, to show, to try to procure that buyer, find that ready, willing, and able buyer. They are also hired to negotiate and be responsible for funds, and over and above, always disclose material facts is what the firm has to do. We have to have fair housing language in there. Here's what it looks like, and then we'll probably call it, let's see here. Here's our listing agreement, and there it is. Always easy to find, bold, all caps. Let's read it. The agent, aka firm, shall conduct all brokerage activities in regard to this agreement without respect to the fresh corn. We'll learn as an acronym that constitutes these categories: race, color, religion, sex, national origin, handicap, or familial status, or of any party or prospective party. Don't discriminate against anybody. And then also, if you're a realtor, you have an ethical duty to conduct such activities in addition to those without respect to their sexual orientation or gender identity of any party or prospective party. That is built into every agency agreement, just like that. 7 protected classes. We'll get into it in Unit 19. And again, it's good to have that equal housing opportunity logo down there. And it needs to be very, I'm losing my words today, very conspicuous, very obvious, just stand out. That's why it's all bold, all caps. Seller duties. Sellers agreeing to allow showings. Now, sometimes people get sick, things happen, but for the most part, allow the showings. Don't sabotage it by not allowing any showings. Keep it presentable, whatever that means. Provide documentation required to facilitate the transaction. The attorney might need some stuff. You need some stuff. And to cooperate as promised, and to ultimately pay from the proceeds. There's some things in that listing agreement, some provisions. We acknowledge the fact that the buyer is going to need to, there's an opportunity, let's say, for the buyer to prove that they are serious about buying. And they're going to prove that by giving a check, not to the seller. This check is called earnest money, and this check sits in an escrow account held by either an attorney or one of the firms. It's the buyer willing to set aside some money, distance himself from his money, earnest money amount, let's say it's $5,000. I'm telling you that I'm so serious about buying your house that I'm going to let someone else hold my $5,000 earnest money, and then I promise that I will, if I do buy the house, that'll count as a credit to my side. But if I don't buy the house, depending on the time frame within which I decide not to buy it, we'll talk about that later, I may not get that earnest money back. That's how serious I am. If there's a dispute between the seller and the buyer about who should get the earnest money, should the seller keep it, should the buyer get it back, the listing agreement spells out that the parties will agree to an arbitration before they go to a lawsuit. They'll at least try to get it arbitrated and work it out that way. If there is a dispute and the buyer thinks they should get it all back and the seller says, no way, the broker, whoever's holding it in their trust account, they can't do anything with it. Even if they like one of the parties more than the other, they just have to sit there and wait until the parties who are arguing agree in writing as to what should happen to that money. It might be that they eventually decide to split it, perhaps. Or it might be that they just hold out and they're just obstinate. I should get all of it no matter what. The deal's dead. They walked away from the deal, but the money is still sitting in the trust account. And this, in the listing agreement, it spells out and says, look, in that event, if there's an argument, disagreement, if I'm holding it in my company trust account, it's got to sit there till you both agree in writing. Eventually, what could happen is I'm tired of balancing my trust account. I try to seeing this earnest money there for a deal that's never going to close and bring me any money, any income. Therefore, I'm going to turn it over to the clerk of court, and now they're going to give you some time. And if you still don't work it out, they'll just take it on behalf of the state. They also talk about dual agency and material fact. Look for these things. Do a little screen capture here. Find these things and those other points like the expiration and the parties and the legal description. Circle them or identify where they are as homework. So get familiar with that listing agreement, and let's talk a little more about that when we come back, and I'll see you on Wednesday.